I feel like it's a very different climate where you are.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I'm in Vegas too, so it's even different than like the rest of the U.S. Like
Yeah.
I'm from like Baltimore originally, way there on like the east coast of the U.S. and it's like my parents, like I'll talk to my parents are still there, and it's like it's like snowy and it's about to be like snow weather and shit there, but
Yeah, it looks warm. Is it warm? Is it warm in Vegas all year round?
um yes and no compared to like England. Yes, it's warm.
Mm,
But in the wintertime it does drop to like 50, 60 throughout the day. But
right. I
that's
don't know what that is
oh
because we
shit.
have different
Oh right,
temperatures.
like, so that's like I guess the base
Um,
rule is like subtract 32 or something.
I think it's like,
So it would be
is it
like
when it's 0 to us? It's like almost 30 to you, I
yeah,
think.
zero
Is
to
that
you
right?
is like freezing temperature, and us it's
Yeah.
32. Yeah, so
Right. Right. Yeah.
it's inaccurate, but it's just add or minus 32 gives you like a general thing. But yeah, sorry, yeah, the fucking we use metric. We don't use the metric system either. So it's
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy, heavy, heavy.
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No! Inner
Resources.
life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
So yeah, so where you are, it's like probably like what, like 28 or something an hour temperature.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like pretty warm.
yeah. Pretty warm. Like you could go outside without a jacket. It's like a little chilly, but yeah, it's nice. It's like yeah, you only get this in like the Southwest really, or the South. I guess stays pretty warm in the U.S. year round. But
Sounds
yeah,
really nice.
and I saw you were tweeting about All Saints Day and shit. So you were
Mm,
a lost Catholic out there in England, or
yeah, yeah. In the very anti-Catholic country that is England,
I was gonna
is
say
where I
what
live.
I didn't know that, and then not to be all parasocial and shit, but when I saw you tweeting it, I was like, huh, a Catholic in England. I guess it makes
Mm.
sense, right? Like, but
Well, like there's lots of Catholics in England, but mine is from my Scottish side of my family. So my family is Scottish Roman Catholics. I feel like, you know, there's a Protestant thing in Scotland too. There's Catholics and Protestants, but I feel like it's easier to be a Catholic in Scotland actually,
right,
because especially here in Brighton, like there wasn't even any masses that were on. There wasn't even any normal masses, never mind like particular ones for this occasion. And there's not any Catholic churches in my area.
yeah.
So the further south you go in England, the less people, the more anti-Catholic people become.
Yeah, I grew up in a very Catholic part of the country here in the U.S. Like Baltimore is incredibly, and I didn't know that till I moved away
Mm.
from it. Like it's very much dominated by Catholics. Went to Catholic schools and all that kind of shit, and yeah.
So you're not? Are you not a Catholic? I take it you're
I
not a Catholic.
well, I'm confirmed in the church for sure, but I could call myself atheist now. But like, yeah, I know a lot about Catholicism because because I was raised in
Oh,
it
so
and went to
you
the
were.
schools.
Oh, so you were raised as a Catholic. So you are a
Yes,
Catholic then.
yeah. I'm confirmed Catholic
You're
technically,
right,
but
right.
non-practicing or whatever. Yeah, yeah,
Mm,
yeah.
interesting. So you're more Catholic than I am because I didn't go to Catholic school and I haven't been confirmed or anything. I was
Really?
only baptized, but yeah, but I do believe in it, so therefore I try to go along with it.
Right.
But I'm going to the most anti-Catholic event of all time on Sunday. I'm going to this thing called Lewis Bonfire Night. Have you heard of it?
No, 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 no.
So like on the 5th of November in the UK, it's like Guy Fawkes Night, Bonfire Night, where you celebrate like the death of Guy Fawkes. Who committed treason against like Parliament, and you basically you like everyone just has like a bonfire and fireworks and stuff. And I'm going to like the oldest, most insane one because I've got a visitor staying with me from America, and I want to take him to that because it's even as an English person, you're like, this event is mental. There's like people, they have like different clans within this little village of Lewis, and they plan for it all year round. and each clan has its own little uniform. They wear like little striped uniforms, or like just different uniforms, and they have tiki torches,
Right.
and they on the night of bonfire night, and they go around with them, and there's all these different things that happen, and they have like a huge effigy of the Pope, and they burn it, and last time I went, they had a huge effigy of Donald Trump as well, and they burned that. And there's like a huge parade that goes through the streets of this tiny little village called Lewis, and it's like the biggest event that they have of the year. It's a massive thing, and they just prepare for it all the rest of the time. But it's quite scary, like when you've got all of these like Puritan feeling people like coming at you with tiki torches, and you're someone like me. It really gave me flashbacks to just like probably the way that Hester Pryne would feel in that situation.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's actually perfect. Yeah, and you're hearing the voice, listeners, of Melly, our guest today for the Heavy Board podcast. And she's here to talk about Nathaniel Hawthorne's The Scarlet Letter. Those of you probably have heard of this. It is probably one of the most famous books ever written, at least in the American side of things. But Melly, I want to start with basically introducing you to the listeners here. So we have the host with the Now Then podcast. And what is your podcast about? Like, just kind of tell listeners what they would get with Melly and the Now Then podcast.
So I just talk about things concerning the UK and Europe generally. And it's usually just about like a book or a film or a cultural event or something connected to Europe and the UK. It's kind of difficult though to stay within that formula, because sometimes there's things that I really want to talk about with like American mutuals on Twitter, and then I'm like, oh, this just doesn't fit my very nationalist, narrow little thing that I've like created. So I'm probably just gonna like, go out a bit more from that. But generally it's supposed to be sort of like a cultural podcast.
Yeah.
That's more focused on the part of the world that I'm in rather than just America, which is what most media is centered on.
I'd say the dominance of American culture throughout the world. The colonization of culture.
And I love American culture, but you can only really talk about something that you know about yourself, and I'm not American, so therefore my only choice is to, oh my God, do you know what I feel like's happened reading this book, which is really good, but it'll take me a while to get out of it. It's like, because I'm so feeble-minded, I'm like, do you know, because the book is written in Old English, Nathaniel Hawthorne has written it in that Old English style where he said, do you like when I sent you the message being like, can we do 7 instead? Something hath come up which demandeth my attention. Like, I'm thinking in that.
Yeah.
Did it make you feel like that?
It always
or am
does.
I just feeble-minded?
Yeah. It always does with the how doth you wished to like they just add the th to everything. And
saying like thee, thou, and thee.
Right. Yeah. And I guess that's the British influence. No, I just but
it is.
I've heard that too. Like, I guess I haven't looked into it a whole lot, but like with the accents and things like that, where they had like the first colonies come to the like kind of basically east coast of the U.S., where like there's like regions, even where I'm from, like the kind of more isolated regions, like in the Chesapeake Bay, there's a bunch of islands. It's known as Tangiers Island, and it's like just like a fishing village, very small, like 300 people living there, and they've just been isolated from the rest of the country for that long, and they still have a very thick kind of accent it's not British, but it's like old, it's like leftover from like 1600s.
Oh, they got
England.
like a do they have like a transatlantic accent?
Yeah, and it like leans more British, but it's not quite like the British accent of today.
Wow.
And like it's strange. Yeah.
I'd love to hear that. Tangiers Island.
Yeah. It's like like the mid-Atlantic accent, but like a little bit more British. What would they call it? Hockney over there, or Cockney over there? In England?
Cockney, yeah.
A little Cockney type inflections and things. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Some of my cousins, like one of my second cousins does this kind of as a joke. Like, I've not spoken to him for years, but I've heard him say thee and thou, like just in general speech, and that's kind of like quite a northern thing to do. and they say that like northern accent in English is closer to sort of Shakespearean English than the Southern Englishes, which I like to believe. I don't know whether it's true or not, but like Northerners in like a jokey way do use those old phrases sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I always talk to a mutual of ours, shout out to the nanny state, where whenever something comes up between accents or like UK versus US or something, that we always get into the DMs, just be like, what's going on? Like,
oh yeah, Brits love to talk about like classism and the differences between like the North-South divide. You know, we love that shit.
Well, the Americans do love to romanticize England and in all of Europe, really, like European accents and then British accents, as we do treat it as I think as our mutual nanny state said in that time, as a qualification, as if you have like a PhD or something.
Oh my
That's how
God.
Americans treat that accent.
I'm about to gravely disappoint you, Andrew.
No, not at all. Yeah. But yeah, so you hear that, listeners. Melly's out there on the Now and Then podcast. Get out there. It's going to be linked in the description of this episode, as always. Get there, sign up for it, give it a listen. Yeah, what I usually start off with is what versions we read, because this is kind of a dorky podcast in terms of the book nerds that want to know which edition, which blah, blah, blah. So,
oh, wow, really? Let me see what mine is.
This book was originally published in 1850 to much controversy. It's here in the U.S., at least, it's known as one of the most banned books ever, just because when it came out at that time, like, it was just, I guess the infidelity, I guess the fact that it, demeaned clergy in some ways too, showing that clergy are, human and make the same type of errors as everybody else. And I guess it just offended people, or I don't know what it was, but apparently it got banned a lot because of it.
Like in 1850 when it came out, you mean?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that's so understandable to me. But when you messaged me recently, did you say that there'd been some scandal recently or something? Has it been banned from schools recently for like a different reason, probably a woke reason or something?
Nowadays, it is removed from curriculum because it's considered "quote unquote" too hard, like too difficult for 13-year-olds to read or something. And then there is some more woke, but those are always ridiculous. Like the people that are.
I don't really know what the woke reading of this would be, to be honest. Actually.
Yeah, I would say maybe some feminist. So maybe something about like Hester not having as much agency, although you have to stretch.
Oh, I
because...
would have said she's like a proto-feminist. Hester.
Right, exactly.
Completely.
Yeah. That's what I would say too. Yeah. But, there's always, shit, I know, and this contaminates the entire discourse all over the world. Whatever a fucking rural school board in, like, Tennessee or Florida is infecting, like, the international news now. Like, they're like, oh my God, they're banning shit in, like, Florida or something. And it affects everything. But, yeah, originally out in 1850. I have the Signet Classics printing, which was originally published in 1959, but the version I have, listeners, was published in 2009 with the introductions and all that good stuff.
So mine's like Penguin English Library.
Classic.
Okay. So Penguin English Library, let's see. It's just got the address of the Penguin Group. Hang on. It doesn't really say. It just... Oh, okay, it does. First published in the United States of America by Ticknor, Reed and Fields, 1850. Published in Penguin Classics, edited by Nina Bayham, 1986. This edition first published in the Penguin English Library, 2012.
Nice.
Okay.
Nice. And you can get both of those editions. We'll link them, listeners, in the description. And like, really, whatever copy of book you get of this, like, there are cheaper ones you buy. There are used ones all over the fucking world, probably in bookstores in multiple languages. Go get yourself a copy, listeners. We'll link it.
Can I have a look at your cover?
Yeah.
Oh, lovely.
With the pilgrims, like the Puritans, right up in there, like.
Yeah. I love that they're so different. The editions of our books look so different to each other.
And Signet is known for like the cheap, like $5 copies or less of like paperbacks.
Right.
Usually only classics, like books that are like, in the public domain, like 100 years old, more than that, whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, they're always good, cheap little copies. And this is one you want to have on your shelf, listeners. But I always like to start too, Melly, what's your history with this book? Like,
So
how'd you
I
come
don't,
to it
I
ever?
don't,
Sorry, yeah, go on.
yeah, I don't have any history with this book whatsoever. So I want to thank you for bringing me to this because basically I've just been working my notice at this hellish like corporate office job that I hate, and then I've had like loads of mad stuff going on like personally. I've been really busy, so I just wouldn't have been reading a book at the moment at all if it wasn't for you roping me into this. And I was like, oh God, can I even remember how to read? Like, I hadn't read for ages, and yeah, this has like forced me to read this classic book, and I absolutely loved it. So thanks so much for getting me to do this. And yeah, it's like the perfect autumnal book. Like I can't think of anything more perfect to read for this moment because it's just such like an autumnal book in every way, isn't it? And then also, you know, it's just been Halloween and then All Saints Day and then All Souls Day today. And then just the Puritan aspect of this whole thing. I just can't think of a more perfect like time to have read it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look at that endorsement, listeners. Absolutely.
So that's just me making up for the fact that I've got no history with this book whatsoever. So that's just, you know, I'm just going from this point onwards, and I've discovered something new that is a very important piece of American literature, which also links to Britain. So yeah,
That's
it
what's
feels
so
like a
interesting.
combination
Yeah.
of our cultures.
In the literary history, it's all linked because I guess maybe just like we speak the same language with different accents or whatever, that we just link
I mean,
British
we
and
kind of
American.
do.
Yeah. That like we link. At least I'm studying this as long as I have in like college settings and shit. Like, you know, they call it British literature. Like they separate it out. We have American and British literature. But then like when we talk about like the larger Western canon, it usually includes both, you know, because of the, not just because the countries are so intertwined with the history, but because of the language probably. But yeah, I mean, so I take it this was not required reading in like English high schools and things like that.
No, I'm embarrassed to say that I've never even come across it. Like, I didn't know what it was. And just like the American people that I know here in the UK, they were like, oh my God. Like, the responses of American people that I know were like guiltily being like, oh, I feel like I should have read that because it's a really important piece of American literature, but I've never read it. And I was just like, oh, I was none the wiser to it until now. What about you? Can I ask you? What is your history with the book?
Yeah, mine is actually the same. Where I was, I actually don't think I was ever assigned it, like officially assigned it in high school, but it was constantly talked about. It's one of those books that's so old and so famous, it's just a part of culture. Like people will just make references to it and things like that. Like it'll just be referenced in conversation. They'll just talk.
I think that's a particularly American thing because that's not my experience of it at all.
Right.
Yeah.
So my bias is definitely towards American American interpretation. But I'd never read it either. I'd never read the whole thing. I knew the gist. I knew like the Scarlet Letter, like the actual like what the story was, just because it's so ingrained in everything. Almost biblical, if I dare go that far, in terms of just how prevalent the stories and like things are. And I guess there's a lot of reference to Bible verses and things like that in this text, and a lot of classic texts. But yeah, my experience is not completely devoid of it, because like I had heard of it. It's always constantly brought up, particularly now, like in the last 8 years of our culture, in terms of making people cultural pariahs, or you know, like just shoving them into a corner, labeling them with something, and everybody gawks. You know, it is rather poignant, and people always bring it up. I guess just because throughout history, particularly, I mean, this is every country, and then in just American history, there's always been periods where it's like this is about the Puritans, listeners, but you know, the Red Scare in the 50s was just people would quote this book because it was similar, where they're just labeling you, you know, a witch or an adulterer in this case. And then all of the rest of the culture just treats you as some type of contamination. But yeah, no history with it other than just, yeah, I know I'm supposed to read it. I know I was supposed to do all
So
this.
you're like the Americans that I know where they were like guilty, like, oh, I should have read it. But yeah, I think, yeah, it seems like it's been very instructive in your culture because people refer to it all the time. Maybe people were referring to it here and I just didn't notice because I didn't know what they meant. But I think we probably have that just more about like our pieces of literature instead, which is very interesting because something that you've had referred, like something that you have seen referred to a lot, I have very innocently come to this for the first time, and that's been great as well, because like there's so many sort of very sordid twists and turns in this book, and they've caught me every time because I didn't even really have an awareness of the story. So like I can often, sometimes you can guess what's going to happen next in a book. I often can. And with this, it's like as soon as one of the new revelations comes out in it, you're like, oh, damn it, how didn't I just see that? But you really don't you think? You really don't see it until like the last second. Did you have that experience, or because you already heard about it, did you kind of already know what was going to happen?
I didn't know all the details, but I was shocked considering how this is written. And we mentioned it a little bit, but like the language that's used, it's complex, it's older, it'll if you're not used to it and it can trip up a lot of readers. So I do understand people having issues with it, but yeah, I mean, my next thing is always just kind of like, yeah, how did it kind of read for you? And I would say same for me. Like despite it being difficult, I was actually shocked at how into it I was. Like kind of like not pulse pounding thriller or anything like that, listener, but just kind of is that first scene where you get her just kind of, walking out of the prison and she's holding that infant and then everybody's gathered around. It's like, what a great way to start this. And you just, at that point, I think my first sitting with this, I read it in a couple sittings. I just rocked out like 120 pages just because I was so kind of hooked on the, like story. And I was kind of shocked that I was that hooked on such an older book because, my experience with old texts like this and even older texts that we've done on this podcast are just, it takes a while. Like I'm like, oh, if I have to read this, I'm like, okay, I needed like 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks to read some of these old books just because it's going to take a while to process all that. And the sentences are very complex and shit like that. But this one, I was like surprised how well I went through it. But how did it read for you?
You probably had some good training in that you've read like even older books recently, because I also thought it was a really great way to start the book, but I was a bit getting, I was trying to understand the meanings of some of the sentences, and it was like a bit slow progress. But then what kind of happened was the more I got used to that flow of prose and the meanings of some of the words, I ended up just like fully understanding it and like getting through it really quickly towards the end. Like it gets easier as you go on, doesn't it? Because you start understanding, because not only is it like different words and turns of phrases and the way that the sentences are written, but it's also like you've got to understand the mindset of people in that time, and because sometimes you'll understand the sentence, but then you won't understand the mindset of the people and like how puritanically they see things. But then you kind of become one of them by the end of it, which I very much enjoyed.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like, it is one of the people use this phrase a lot in literature circles and shit. Where they say, "Oh, it teaches you how to read it." It kind of does. Like, it kind of does, kind of like teach you how to. And I guess just his style and all the writers at that time. If you read like any of the big writers, even the big British writers or Russian all the people in the 1800s writing great novels were like, long, lofty sentences that have multiple parts, and you have to really keep up with them as they shift and add and add and add, and then go back to where it started, like four lines up, and then you're like, it does get overwhelming. Yeah. So I was worried about that, but then like you said, I was kind of surprised at how quickly I started running through it with
and as I said, by the end of it, I was messaging you in Old English, and saying I run it slightly late, but yeah, it's very addictive, that Old English turn of phrase once you get used to it.
I had an undergrad, and I don't recommend teachers do this, but I had a professor in undergrad it was a British Lit course, go figure, and they were making us read. He made us read Beowulf in the original, like old English. So
I've never read that.
It's more German than it is English. Like you can't even recognize the word "the," or like it's
not
actually,
even. Yeah, I think I've seen a bit of it.
Yeah.
I think someone screenshotted some bit to like show to me how difficult it is, because I think I was bragging like, oh yeah, because I'm English, I bet I'd be able to understand it more easily than an American person. And then I looked at it and was like, no, actually, no way.
Yeah. And it is being like 19 and trying to read Old English, like it was basically gibberish, so you get nothing out of it. It would have been better if we got a translation, or if you really wanted us to see the Old English, have it like on one page the Old English, on the other page the translation, so we could actually understand what's happening. But
You should be able to get like Old English on Duolingo. That's like the next step, because you can learn like Welsh, or like you can learn Scots Gaelic and other useless languages. So they may as well bring out Old English so that you can actually read some of these very old books.
do you have any Gaelic in your family
Yeah,
speakers?
yeah. Oh no, not. I just thought you meant like generally people.
Well, both, yeah.
Probably very far back. Not really. I feel like my family are very like anglicized. They'd hate me to say that, but yeah, they don't speak Gaelic. I've heard old ladies speak Gaelic though in Scotland, and it does sound cool.
My mother, on my
I
mother's
definitely can't speak
side,
it.
her mother is from Ireland.
Oh.
Not, I don't think she was first gen for me, but like back in like, late 1800s or whenever the family came over, my grandmother was born in, the 1920s over here. But she was saying her grandfather spoke Gaelic, like he would speak it. And my mother would tell me these stories of like, my mother's grandfather would speak it. So, whenever they were like family dinners or something, he'd just go off like at the table, like in a language nobody else in like the whole
my
house
God.
spoke and stuff, because he was still kind of right off the boat, and yeah, so it was always interesting to me, like it's completely dead here, and I know it's mostly dead over there too, right? Like
Oh
that
yeah,
language,
it's literally just like, I think it's just like some people, maybe a couple of people in Ireland, and then just some old ladies talking it. It's not like a big thing.
Right.
Although actually, when I was in Donegal for like a month staying with my auntie and uncle one summer when I was a teenager, I just got sent over to Donegal with my auntie and uncle. I was watching some Irish TV, and there was Gaelic channels then, and that was in like the late 90s, I think,
Damn.
2000s. So maybe there still is.
That's I mean, I guess they teach Latin and stuff still, like even over here in schools, they like, if you're in like the AP, what they call advanced placement courses here and shit, like the pre-college courses in high school, they like, you have to take it a lot of times, take Latin to.
Did you learn Latin?
Fuck no, fuck no. I am trying to learn. If I do try to do daily language exercises, I'm nowhere close to fluent or anything like that in any of them. But yeah, I do try to keep up my chops, especially being somebody who has studied this for a living, essentially, was like, I just feel like I have to, like, I need to. And like, especially when you're reading old texts like this, or even just, 20th century texts, a lot of modernist texts.
Why? What are you doing?
Well,
What
like,
do you do?
what I do, usually I'll do Duolingo. I have, right now, I'll do Spanish, French, Italian, and German. And I'll usually just do a few lessons in the morning, and then just kind of, I'm nowhere close to being able to just hold a conversation or anything with, or even read a book. But I would like to eventually be able to read some of these texts, like Proust in the original French or something, or read. I always, my dad tells stories too, where he said his grandmother spoke German when they came over to the U.S. here in like Baltimore area, but then like nobody else did, so it all died, within a
right,
generation.
yeah.
And that was the thing
That's a
people were
shame.
doing at the time, like especially during World War II, World War One. Like the German immigrants did not want to make it known that they could, that they were German and spoke German and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
So they didn't have their kids do it, and then it gets lost pretty quickly. But so maybe trying
Yeah,
to
I can
revive
imagine.
that, but yeah.
That's cool.
But yeah, we got a little bit. But yeah, this book fucking, I mean, it's so ripe with themes. Like, it's so ripe with themes. And I was just thinking, like, okay, I don't even know how to approach it with how many things we could talk about. Like, I was thinking, all right, just off the top of my head, reading this, guilt, mob justice or crowd justice, motherhood / womanhood, or even that, martyrdom. Yeah, you could do a feminist angle. You could do, I mean, there's just so many themes in this fucking book. But I wanted to hit on,
Yeah.
I guess a good place to start is just Hester's beauty. Like the theme of like, it's constantly referenced how beautiful she is, and like how she is forced to hide it under this gray cloak and cap, and then have this kind of scarlet letter. But I'd say, what did you think about that? Like kind of beauty and Hester and how it's used, etc.
Yeah, I thought Hester was fascinating, and I thought she is the most virtuous person in the whole book, in the whole story, and it's precisely because she thinks that she isn't. And I think that is part of why she's beautiful, actually. I think she is like a completely, well, no one's a completely good person, but I think she is a good a person as you can hope to be. And yeah, she's very beautiful, and she's also just very like bright and talented.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
Like the whole thing with her being good at needlework and embroidery, because you know at first, so when she comes out of the prison with baby Pearl and she has to walk through the sort of like what feels just like medieval peasants like staring at her and like shouting stuff, and then they make her go and stand on the, what's it called, like the pillory or something, they make her go on and stand on this stand to be looked at for hours as her punishment, and she's obviously wearing the Scarlet Letter. Like after that, when she sort of is just left to go into the town after she comes out of prison, I was thinking, how is she going to survive? Like, what is she going to do? She's not got a husband, she's not got any money, but she obviously supports her and Pearl by being like an amazing dressmaker and seamstress and embroiderer. So I feel like that's part of her beauty too. She turns her hand to beautiful things. Like she's beautiful, she creates these beautiful things. Pearl is so beautiful. And yeah, and I also I googled Hester Prynne, and it showed me Demi Moore dressed as Hester Prynne. So I think there was a film. Did you see it?
I didn't see the film. No, I didn't. But I think, yeah, there's probably a couple, I'd imagine.
But yeah, it looks like the most famous one is Demi Moore playing Hester Prynne, which is kind of perfect because, you know, like pale with dark hair, and she looks kind of what you would maybe imagine Hester Prynne to look like.
Absolutely. And I was thinking, I didn't think about that either, but yeah, that she creates beauty. And then you consider even, yeah, creating Pearl or creating these garments, or like you could even extend it, I think, even further, where like she creates a little bit of beauty in the community too. And then not just like the physical or beauty that you look at and stuff, but like maybe emotional or spiritual beauty, like in some way. Like she kind of helps bring that into the what is in the story, listeners. I think it's supposed to be like early settlements of Boston. So it's called Boston, but this is like 1600s, where it's basically not even a city. It's like a settlement, like a village at this point.
Yeah, so is it in Salem? Is that Massachusetts?
It's not Salem, but close to Salem. Salem, Massachusetts.
Oh,
is the,
because actually, yeah, when in the introduction bit where Nathaniel Hawthorne is talking about that custom house place where he was, I guess he was working when he found this Scarlet Letter, that's in Salem, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I guess this is Boston near to that?
Yeah, it's pretty close. I'm not actually sure how far away it is from, but Boston would be like the major city in Massachusetts there on the East Coast, and then it would be like Salem was one of the settlements. I guess it's still relatively, I mean, it's nowhere near the size of Boston, I think, but I don't know. Maybe listeners let us know if you know. But yeah, Salem's famous for the witch trials, where they had the kind of Puritans did the same thing as this that they would do to Hester, but they would even worse. They would just hang you, you know, if you were accused of being a witch, or they would drown you or whatever it was. And, you know, no justice. They called it justice. There were trials, but not really. You know, they were kangaroo courts, and everybody just, you know, women were just getting killed for it. You know. Yeah,
because Mrs. Gibbons, or whatever she's called, like the sister of the governor,
yeah,
who's clearly like a scary witch in this book, or is put across as a scary witch, she ends up, it sounds like she gets tried as a witch.
Yeah.
After, not in this book, but like after this book. I wonder, this is probably something I should know, but like the place where the witch trials happened in the UK is kind of like the same area of the country that I'm from. It's like it's in Lancashire, which is close to where I'm from. And there's a bus that you can get on from Manchester City Centre called the Witch Way, and it takes you all the way to where the witch trials were. Which one was it? Did it happen first over here? I guess they probably did it first here, and then they went over there to the Puritan settlements, and then took that with them. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah,
Because it happened in both places.
It took the whole world by storm, and I guess it was like a medieval holdover too, because I think like some of the first books printed once the printing press was invented, were like, they weren't like, oh, people would think, oh, it's the Bible, or oh, it's like some educational stuff. What was most of the books that were printed were like how to spot a witch, like how to, like kind of like medieval, like if she cursed, like, so, really kind of weird things too that, we would look at today as crazy. But I guess that was just passed around.
I've got this book called Old Lancashire Tales, and it's put together all the stories from those times in my area about like witches and different supposedly supernatural happenings and different punishments people would get for crimes. It's, to be fair, it's not that great actually. Like it's not written that well, but it's still quite interesting. It's got some interesting illustrations, but they're just all put together from a past time by this guy who found them all.
It's absurd. I mean, it's crazy to look back now and see it. In America, they're obsessed with, Arthur Miller's The Crucible, which is basically a play about the Salem witch trials and like how it happened, the people that were accused, blah, blah, blah. And that's a very famous one that they've made a bunch of movies of and stuff. But yeah, maybe it's just that the fact that, like you said, like the American cultural dominance, it just overshadows the original, like English and European witch trials or whatever that were going on for like hundreds of years before the colonies. But
I don't know whether it was on. I don't know what the time period was, but like I feel like when I was a kid and I heard about the witch trials, it was really unimaginable.
Right.
But like the way things are now, I feel like it's actually quite easy to imagine.
It was incredibly radical. Like for me, like it's the last 8 years, but for me, it really ramped up like the last 3 or 4, where I was just looking around being like, oh, this is how it all happens. Like this is, it's always unimaginable. Same. And then you look around and be like, why is this person saying this? And then they're like, oh, that's how it happens. Yeah.
The woke stuff before, but then it was accelerated by COVID, definitely.
And the fact that it was global, like the fact that it was a globally panic. It was like everybody was panicking, and they started just making witch accusations, at least the modern equivalent. And I was just like, holy shit. Like, this is how it all happened. This is how the Germans took over. Like, it
was like the plague. It was like the Black Death all over again, but without the sort of bubbling sores on your skin and the really disgusting deaths. But it was all just psychological instead.
Yeah. And I think that's another reason that I this book is always brought up now too, because it is timeless in that way. Because it's very human to like accuse people of being witches, especially when you're scared or superstitious. But like, the reason this has stood the test of time, I think, is because it does show us exactly what happens. Is that it's always never as clear as it seems. It's always misguided. The mob justice is never actually justice. It's more vengeance than anything else. Punishment more than anything else. And I think it is scary. Like I'm glad you brought it up, because I have never been like as afraid that this might happen like until recently. Like, we're just how quick it can happen. Like somebody can start a hashtag, a fucking teenager can start a hashtag, and all of a sudden the biggest governments in the world are implementing that hashtag. Like, it's just incredible to me. I've never seen anything like it before.
And all it takes is in your personal relationships is for one person to accuse you of something, and then your life's over, because court of law doesn't mean anything anymore either. So like on a global governmental level, yes, but also on like an interpersonal level, it's crazy how easily your life can be ruined by like a tweet or someone saying one thing and then everyone just believing them.
Did you have anything like that happen over the last?
No, but I just like
seen it.
Just because I'm like a bit of a gobshite who can't not say what I think. I just like during COVID, it was just difficult because I could just see really plainly from the start that like the vaccine was bullshit. all of the way that everything, like the whole world just changed within like a day.
Right.
I could just like see through it all, and like it's frustrating. I've said this before on like my podcast, that like it's frustrating because at the time you'd been met by this tense silence, like even by the people closest to you, so you feel very alienated. And now when I'm talking about this, of course, all my friends and family are like, "No, we were on your side the whole time. We also thought that." But it's like, no, you didn't. Or if you did, you didn't have the guts to like come out and say it. And I think it caused like terrible damage. And I think we're only just, you know, like in the way where like if a business like that WeWork is going bankrupt at the moment, and that's from the results of COVID basically getting into debt. I feel like the psychological impacts are the same, that it takes a while for them to be fully shown in us, the impacts of that time. And
Absolutely.
we're all feeling it now, which is why everyone's so crazy.
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, I didn't have anything like, you know, Hester Pryne or anything. Like, I didn't have anything like that happen. But like, I remember same thing. Like in 2020, it was starting, and I was right from the beginning like, everybody's acting ridiculous. Like, this is absurd. Why is everybody doing this? And it led to group chat blowups, like group chats that I had been in, you know, just with friends for like years or whatever. And like, I don't know if they just cut me out or whatever, but this group chat just stopped having people participate in it or whatever after.
Oh, so you think that they like sneaked off to another group chat?
Definitely. Yeah, and like I said, it wasn't even, I mean, I guess it became political very quickly, but at that time it still wasn't quite political. It was just people being scared, I think, and then not knowing what to do, and then you had all these idiots on TV every day saying all this bullshit, and then people were getting... So, you know, I try not to blame them, I guess. Or I try to
Yeah, because I have a lot of
them.
sympathy towards that, because I was scared too at first.
Right.
And like, I mean, I could, to be fair, when COVID first hit, like I wore a mask, and like I believed initially it was a real virus, but it was when it got political that I could see through it. Because like just before I bought a mask, I remember I was like looking for one on the internet, and I asked someone, or like asked Google as well. I was like, "Oh, like what do you need the mask to be like for it to actually protect you?" And the overall consensus was it just needs to be cloth. And I was like, "What?" So
Right.
what? So you're saying that I just put a piece of cloth over my face and it doesn't have to have anything particular on it to like protect me in any way? And that was when I was like, wait a minute. And then when the mask thing became really politicized, I was like, this is ridiculous. It's just a piece of cloth. It's like wearing a pair of knickers over your face. Like,
Right.
what is it? It's obviously not doing anything.
Yeah. Oh, how soon we forget. Like, and that turned into a Hester Pryne situation very quickly with the Scarlet Letter. Like, the mask was the Scarlet Letter, right? Well,
Yeah.
if you weren't wearing the Scarlet Letter,
not wearing the mask.
it became that absolute. Oh God, that was insane. Yeah, but I think it's important to bring up, listeners, because it is this kind of I think just how much, you know, this book still resonates, because this is just touching something that's incredibly human, but also like, you know, never goes away no matter how advanced we get or how much we like to think of ourselves as beyond that, or like enlightened enough to not make those mistakes again. Well, we make them all the time. Like, it happens all the
because
time.
it can come out in many different forms, because there's obviously the woke mob, and then there's the whole COVID thing, but then there's the other side of it, which like on Twitter, you know how it is on there, everyone has got really extreme opinions. So then when I said some like opinion about like abortion that was like a really neutral and like not a big deal type of opinion, and all of these tradcasts like absolutely pounced on me, and they reminded me of like the Puritans. Like they really did.
Yeah.
So people are being Puritans from all angles in all different types of ways. Like the incels are Puritans about like female sexuality. Like the religious people are the most obvious Puritans. They're like the actual ones. And then the woke people are like that. Like everyone's doing that. Like everyone's on a witch hunt, but for different reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it just overlays everything so well. I have this section that I want to read, and then I want to ask about this, about the morality angle to it, about this being kind of like almost a fable in some regards, not a fairy tale, but almost a fable, where it's teaching you these kind of life lessons in certain, what they call, at least, you know, in the field of study of literature. But on page 46 in my version is really kind of the last sentence that ends the first chapter, where Hawthorne writes, "It may serve, let us hope, to symbolize some sweet moral blossom that may be found along the track, or relieve the darkening close of a tale of human frailty and sorrow." And this is just kind of about the rose bush that's outside the prison guard, and he's talking, I mean, outside the prison door, and he really dedicates a lot of space to talking about this rose bush and how it symbolizes this beauty and hope despite what's happening. And I wanted to ask you basically, like, would you call this a morality story or like a fable in that way?
That's a good question. Yeah. But I feel like it's... So, did you ever read that Aesop's Tales? Is Aesop's Fables when you were a kid? Did you ever have that read to you, or did you ever read it?
I'm familiar with some of them, but I've never actually like read, the stories.
Because they're quite like moralizing and quite straight down the line. Whereas with this, it's this more like gentle paternal thing of trying to express how like we're all bad, like we're all sinners equally, which I like. But yeah, I don't know. It's difficult because like if it was banned at the time, obviously it wasn't seen to be a fable, or it wasn't seen to be moralizing. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I would, if pressed, I would say the same as you. I'd say yes. If easy answer is yes. It's this definitely trying to show us some type of morality, or just like, keep us from making these mistakes, or showing what can happen if you go too far with the Puritanism and the kind of witch hunting and obsessing over who is without sin, right? Like this, I mean, shit, the Christian allegory is all over this story. There's a bunch of scholarship about it. But I mean, just when you think about, like the kind of the preachings of forgiveness, and then the kind of the forgiveness that wasn't granted to Hester until so much later, after all this suffering. And really, the forgiveness that was given to her was a little half-assed, like it was kind of like it was a little... She
had to do a lot to get the forgiveness.
Right. And people were
Whereas the man of the story didn't have to do a lot, and then even after... I don't want to give spoilers.
Yeah, we don't care. Yeah, no, spoilers. Nobody cares. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
But yeah, the minister hasn't had to do as much to work for forgiveness, it feels like, as Hester has.
And I think that maybe just the morality in terms of like showing like the downside of cowardice, like how cowardly the minister was, like how cowardly some of these people were, and how cowardice leads you to be almost vindictive in a way. Like it leads you to be jealous and bitter and angry. Like cowardice is just as bad as like envy and like all the other kind of things. But yeah, I mean, I would say that's the obvious one, right? Like that's the obvious one, but I think he complicates it.
Yeah, because it's like when you're acting like a sort of sniveling wretch, like the minister was, because he was really scared to be exposed, then you're not respecting yourself, therefore you can't really respect other people, and you act like a sniveling wretch in all of your interactions.
Right, and just how like off-putting it is. Like whenever I see somebody sniveling or like afraid, and I don't like to beat people up. I understand there's reasons to be afraid. There's reasons to be whatever, not irrational either, to like put yourself out there in public and all. I understand that, but at the same time, when you're sniveling over it, when you're oh no, it's disgusting to me. I just look at you and it's like that scene in The Godfather. Like, oh, what do I do? He just fucking grabs him. He's like, you can act like a man. Like you can act like a man is what you can do. Like stop crying. Like stop sniveling in front of me like a bitch. Like, and there is like
it really caught me by surprise as well. Like so. Yeah, so Hester goes out into the community and she lives in the town, but she lives out of the town in a little cottage by the seashore, doesn't she? And she's just getting on with her life. She's making these garments and supporting her child. And then basically, what was I going to say? I was going somewhere with that and then I suddenly forgot. So it caught me by surprise that the minister is the one that she had the thing with. Did that catch you by surprise?
Yes, absolutely. It was like a huge, almost like thriller-like reveal when I was reading it. Yeah, like.
But then and you felt immediately like it should have been really obvious as soon as you find out.
Right.
I don't know how he did that. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Yeah, for Hawthorne himself, listeners. There's a great little thing in my version where it gives you kind of a summary of his life and shit like that. And, you know, like most writers of the time, he was struggling to be successful, never really got it until basically this book. And, yeah, just he was admired fiercely by everybody else. Like famously, Melville dedicated Moby Dick to him. Like this, every other writer at the time loved him. And I think it was because of things like that, like Melly was saying, like these kinds of, how well it worked and how well he used the reveals and things like that to his advantage, to the story's advantage, so that a reader can feel that surprise and all that stuff. And he's just a masterful writer, even if a little indulgent. But then you think about the times, like everybody was writing this way with these kind of long sentences.
He is very descriptive, isn't he?
Oh,
like,
yeah.
That whole, so the introduction, the custom. Can you still see me, by the way? Because mine's gone black. It looks like mine's gone black.
You're frozen, but can you see me?
Yeah, I can see you, but I can see that on mine it says ... So I wondered if you... But you can still hear me?
I can still hear you. Sometimes if you turn the camera off and then turn it back on, if they make you use that stupid little button in the center of the app thing.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't understand what that whole bit was about, like the custom house thing, because I couldn't work out. So he was trying to get across the situation, the place he was working in, when he found this letter with like this parcel with the Scarlet Letter in it before the story begins. But I feel like the introduction was so long. I feel like I'd read like a massive part of the book before I'd even got to the actual beginning of it. But I didn't really understand what Custom House was, because it seemed like a nautical port where it's old like sailors or navy officers or something like that. Then it also seemed to be about Republicans and Democrats, so it seemed about the government, which I really didn't understand.
Yeah.
Did you?
I didn't quite understand it either, and I think my guess, from what I don't know a lot about this, but what from my guess would be is that the customs house in the ports at that time had a lot of authority because of all the imports and exports and stuff that were happening on those colonies. And I guess
so the government might have also been based there, as it being
and
powerful.
you got a lot of title. I guess you got at that time. Oh, I guess the time he was writing about it, the king wouldn't have been an issue in America. But I guess at the time of the Scarlet Letter, whoever had the royal seal or was sent there by the king, then like, it would have. I guess you just had ultimate authority or something. Like you had this extra authority in the town that other people didn't, and I guess just like the history. But yeah, there's in my version they had that intro, and then at the end they have like a little essay too that like I guess were both written by Hawthorne, and they explained to me that the reason that they published all of the two essays sandwiching basically the Scarlet Letter novel is I guess because that's how it was originally published in like 1850 with like these two essays alongside of it. Yeah, so I don't know, but yeah, I found the same way. I was pretty bored, like that first 40 pages of just that
the custom house thing. Yeah. It felt like you had to learn about all these old guys for ages in like excruciating, like all these old, were they Navy officers or something, like old men who used to work out on the seas, I guess, in some form, and then now they're just like old decrepit guys who just sit in this place all day like drinking port and like falling asleep. And he just explained them in like excruciating detail, just so at the end he could say that he went upstairs and opened a parcel and saw a Scarlet Letter. Like it just seemed a bit much.
Yeah. It is. I have this idea that I've been working on. I don't usually have to talk public, but there's just the way that the more I learn about like the history of the military, particularly on the U.S. side of things, like before the 20th century, it was just a bunch of scattered mess. Like they had an army and all that, but we didn't have what we would call today, where we have all the different units, like the Navy and the Army and the Air Force, like all the different units of the military.
It might have all been like one thing.
Yeah, and it was scattered like all over the place.
Right.
Militias.
That would make sense.
Yeah. And then I think in the 20th century, like there were all these little scattered seaports and like sea security that acted like navies, but they weren't officially part of the Navy. And then I guess like in the 20th century, they just like enveloped them all in to the Navy and like redid it to make it more uniform and I guess chain of command wise. But so it is hard to think back on that too. Like I'm always like, wait a minute, that's how they fucking did this? Like, all right, but I did want to touch this little passage on basically the description of how beautiful Hester is. Page 51 in my version. It's a little bit long.
I'm gonna have a look. Oh, actually, it probably won't be the same page number, will it?
No.
I want to read it while you're doing it,
but it's chapter 2, a couple paragraphs in.
Chapter 2. Is it Pearl?
It's about.
Is it the one about the chapter about Pearl? Oh no, that's chapter 6. Sorry, I'm way ahead.
The Marketplace, chapter 2. And it's in mine a couple pages in, but it starts with the young woman. The young woman was tall. But I only want to hit it just because it I think it's
really, I've got
shows,
it.
All right,
yeah.
Nice. Yeah, it shows Hawthorne's style, and then it also kind of just shows how important Hester's beauty is to the whole thing, where he takes all this time to and I'm only reading part of it, where this is in paragraphs and paragraphs of her skill, her beauty, and then we talked about like her ability to make beauty, like with her needlepoint and pearl and all this, and I guess even broader, like the kind of the female or the woman's ability to make beauty, or we could go even broader with that. But yeah, this section, the young woman was tall, with a figure of perfect elegance on a large scale. She had dark and abundant hair, so glossy that it threw off the sunshine with a gleam, and a face which, besides being beautiful from regularity of feature and richness of complexion, had the impressiveness belonging to a marked brow and deep black eyes. She was ladylike, too, after the manner of the feminine gentility of those days, characterized by a certain state and dignity, rather than by the delicate, evanescent, and indescribable grace, which is now recognized as its indication. And never had Hester Pryne appeared more ladylike, in the antique interpretation of the term, than as she issued from the prison. Those who had before known her, and had expected to behold her, dimmed and obscured by a disastrous cloud, were astonished, and even startled, to perceive how her beauty shone out, and made a halo of the misfortune and ignominy.
Yeah, because I was wondering, that word's in this book a lot, isn't it? I was like...
Yeah, in which she was enveloped. And that's the whole section that's it. And it goes on, listeners. That keeps going on about her beauty and how graceful and how feminine and antique and classic and just how important that is. And maybe, I don't know if it was meant to imply, but I just wanted to be like, like this out of her beauty and this like what the people were feeling when they saw it too, that halo of the misfortune. Like,
yeah, and like I feel like at this point, because this is the beginning and it's when we're first seeing her, it obviously you're deciding what you think of her as the reader, and it feels like she is going to be like a more mischievous and willful type of character at this point, because that's how she behaves in this scenario, and he's obviously doing that on purpose to make you think that she might be the type of person who will do more like simple things. But then, for the rest of the book, she isn't like this at all. She like sort of dedicates her life to virtue and the pursuit of trying to be good, which is strange. But I guess in this, she is actually more like the way Pearl is, as Pearl grows up.
Yeah, what do we think of Pearl?
I love Pearl. I absolutely love Pearl. I know a little girl called Pearl as well, who's sort of a bit like this in personality. She's like really, really cute, almost cartoon-like with curly hair. And I was thinking of her when I was reading this. Interestingly with Pearl as well, I feel like something that happens is Hester is seen as young and beautiful at the beginning, and then as Pearl gets older, even when she's only like 6 or 7 years old, I feel like there's a turn where like they start to talk about Pearl in like a way, it all gets a bit like Lolita-ish. Did you notice that?
Yeah.
Because like the sailors are trying to kiss her, and like all like everyone's like obsessed with how beautiful she is, and she's the most beautiful little girl anyone's ever seen. It feels very like pedo vibes to me. It's kind of because I guess that's the thing. I guess because they keep giving her this fairy like or nymph or like mermaidy type of aspect, and I guess all of those were sort of like elfish children that were also somewhat like sexualized, and that's what they do with her.
And it is, they keep calling her like an elf child or something, and I guess it's supposed to imply that she's not like other children, and even like the way she speaks, like she's very mouthy 7-year-old for a
But
lot
I
of the.
feel like actually what he's getting across is like, to me anyway, I don't know if this is what the way it would have came across at the time, but I feel like actually he couldn't be making her sound more normal. Like, she is a normal child because she's naughty and willful and she won't do as she's told, and she does things for attention and she hurts her mum, but then as soon as she makes her mum upset, she feels bad about it. And I feel like the more Nathaniel Hawthorne tries to get across that she's this demon child, the more he gets across that she's actually just a normal toddler slash young child, and that the relationship between the mum and the child is exactly like the mum being like Hester being like, is my child actually a demon? It was just the thoughts of probably all parents
Right.
when their kid's being like an absolute little fucker and like having a tantrum on the floor. Like, I'm sure all parents like look at their kid in that way sometimes.
If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, jerk shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard. Yeah, absolutely. And it is like Pearl's almost set up in the story. If I were to go a little bit further, it would be like she's set up as almost the moral compass in a lot of ways. Like where she is set up as she's like, will he hold our hand in front of everybody, mommy?
Totally.
You know, like, and she refuses to even acknowledge the minister or Mr. Dimesdale or Reverend Dimesdale with because she knows almost instinctively where she's like, well, he's not being honest, you know.
Yeah.
Like,
and Hester's
and
like, oh, shut up, child. You don't know anything. You're only a little child.
right.
But she does. She's extremely intelligent and she completely sees the situation for what it is.
Absolutely. And she's fun. She's one of the more fun too. Like she's the one that is there's always this thing in literature where the character that is brash or saying what everybody's always thinking but like afraid to say, like there's the characters that are put in place to say what everyone's thinking but isn't saying are always everybody's favorite because they're just kind of like a lot of fun. Like it's always a lot of fun because, you know, who's doing that in a real social setting? Most people aren't, but like in a fictionalized setting, it is kind of everybody likes that character.
Yeah,
like
that's true.
And yeah, I think it is sent to be, you're supposed to like her and you're supposed to see that she's more morally pure, if not just from her child, you know, being a 7-year-old girl, but she actually understands more than she knows, or even if she doesn't understand it all the way, she knows at such a base level, she understands what's happening that she's able to provide wisdom even, like, you know.
Yeah. I love that whole scene, like the whole scene, as you're saying, like when Hester is led out of the prison and through the people, there's like a couple of things about that. Firstly, it actually really made me laugh the way that they're describing the other women, like the sort of matronly, like the jealous matronly women who just like they're describing them as being like of beef and ale of their native land, and like they're describing them as being like the most crude and vulgar sort of like big busted hard-faced like English women. And I loved it. I was like completely here for it. And they clearly like really are just really jealous of Hester, and that, like they actually didn't want her just to have to wear this Scarlet Letter. They wanted her to be like put to death. And there was one woman who was beautiful and like delicate and kind, and she didn't want that, and that's clearly because she's also beautiful, so she's like more kindly to Hester's plight. Whereas these ugly old whores, like, no, they're not whores, are they? They're Puritans. These ugly old dames, like, just want her to be put to death. And then the other thing that I found shocking was when the man in the crowd sees her and she sees him and she's scared of him. I was just thinking it was like her long lost love in some way that was coming for her, and then I was like, but why is she scared? And then when it turned out to be this man who was a husband in England, was his husband in England, and he'd never made it over, so that's obviously when she had this affair with the minister. Um, like it seems like when he was coming over, he ended up going like living with the Indians for a bit or something. Is that what happened?
Yeah.
Is that why it took ages? Because people thought that he'd like died at sea.
I think it was something like, yeah, he was captured and held hostage by a
Right.
local tribe there. And it's sometimes this is depicted accurately in, like, you know, pop culture and movies and stuff, and then a lot of times nowadays it's not. But I remember it's always, we, at least in school and stuff, they don't teach you how intermingled most of the kind of native tribes were with the settlers and a lot of this stuff. I mean, they do, but it's also like, you know, we have Thanksgiving coming up here in the U.S., and that is like about the tribes and the pilgrims kind of coming together.
Right.
But yeah, like, so when they mention that, like, yeah, there's like the tribes are coming to see because they know something's going on in this kind of, yeah, English village or the English colony that's set up on the shore there, and they would come and see the hangings or like whoever was put on stone to death or something, like in the
Yeah, because this
thing, and
was
it
a
was just a
very,
part
this
of it.
wasn't
Yeah.
really that much a brutal a scene compared to usual. But I'm getting the feeling that what it's trying to get across is because it was such a new colony with full of such hope, and they were so virtuous that they were so Puritan, and they had such hope for this new place that they'd gone to, that they saw everything as like a huge crime. So they saw Hester standing up there with this scarlet letter on her with the baby as being like as bad as hanging someone, because it things hadn't deteriorated yet to the later state of like hangings and punishing people to that extent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess yeah, and it's trying to show how easily that can happen too, like that. And like we said, like we're witnessing something like this now, and I think people are being dishonest about how quickly it can happen. It doesn't take much for this to really come back in full force here, as we saw over COVID, as we saw over all these different things in the last few years. I did want to touch the Scarlet Letter to another kind of longer passage, but in terms of like the purpose of the Scarlet Letter on the breast, there's like an obvious purpose, I feel like, and then there's like kind of deeper, or we could even go like further kind of crazy symbolic shit if we wanted to, because, you know, anything goes. But this is on page 154 in mine, and that's chapter 13. Little bit longer, but I'll read it and we'll chat. It was due in part to all these causes, but still more to something else, that there seemed to be no longer anything in Hester's face for love to dwell upon. Nothing in Hester's form, though majestic and statue-like, that passion would ever dream of clasping in its embrace. Nothing in Hester's bosom to make it ever again the pillow of affection. Some attribute had departed from her, the permanence of which had been essential to keep her a woman. Such is frequently the fate, and such the stern development, of the feminine character and person, when the woman has encountered, and lived through, an experience of peculiar severity. If she be all tenderness, she will die. If she survive, the tenderness will either be crushed out of her, or, and the outward semblance is the same, crushed so deeply into her heart that it can never show itself more. The latter is perhaps the truest theory. She who has once been woman, and ceased to be so, might at any moment become a woman again, if there were only the magic touch to effect the transfiguration. We shall see whether Hester Pryne were ever afterwards so touched and transfigured. And this is kind of the description of the Scarlet Letter. And I was just thinking, yeah, like the purpose of the Scarlet Letter, it's so much more than just be like a visual representation, like so that everybody sees. Like, it is meant to break her. Like, it is meant to break her spirit, break her
Yeah.
confidence as a woman, and even break her beauty,
Yeah.
maybe, like, in some ways. Like, it's meant to just break this person individually and make them feel less than in some way. But I don't know. Yeah, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually loved that bit, but I really read that as rather than being about the Scarlet Letter, it actually was sort of about going through like a heartbreaking or traumatic situation that you have to then recover from. And then if you are to be like a strong person, like she clearly is, she either has to be like really harsh or like lock the trauma away inside of herself, or both. Something I did really like about the way the Scarlet Letter was described was I liked how, even though it's just, well, firstly, she was allowed to create it herself, wasn't she? She embroidered it herself, which is strange. I don't know why they let her do that. But I guess it's good that they did, because it was like a necessary part of the story that she made the Scarlet Letter. And then Pearl, because she decorates Pearl in all these beautiful dresses, Pearl is also like a visual representation of the Scarlet Letter. But I liked how, even though it's just fabric, it was as if it was like actually burning through to her chest whenever people looked at it or whenever people interacted with it in any way. I thought that was really cool.
Absolutely. And the fact that she made it fancy, she, like, they describe it as the letter itself, like she embroidered the edges in this gold thread that made it shine in the sunlight and like really stand out. And
So do you think that maybe they just gave her the A letter and then she chose to do that rather than her actually be tasked with making it?
I think it was, I mean, I don't know enough about the history. I assume it was probably they made her do it as part of the punishment. You have to make your own grave, kind of
right
thing, where it's
little
very
did
kind
they
of
know
Puritan.
she loved doing that. She loved that shit.
She's like, this is going to be the best Scarlet Letter ever made.
Yeah.
This is going to be the best thing we've got. Yeah. And yeah, it is like that. It's incredible. It's incredible how a symbol like that too would everybody knew what it meant, I guess. It was supposed to be the big letter A, right, for adultery.
Yeah, and I like how she did all of her good deeds in the community. Like, she was making these dresses, like, and rags for the poor, like, made from, like, coarse, grey material, like canvas or something, when she could have just been getting paid to make these fabulous garments for the fancy people, like the people, the ministers and whatever. But she was choosing to do this, and the poor were just, like, horrible to her and just didn't appreciate it at all. But like she was doing that, and then it was almost like it said that they decided that A stood for able because she was so able to perform like her duties as a woman. And I think there was also an insinuation at some point about the letter A. It was when the letter A was in the sky, when it flashed in the sky, when the minister was having his nervous breakdown on the cross or whatever.
Right.
But that was insinuated that A meant angel because some other minister was like on his deathbed. But yeah, the one that was assigned to Hester was saying that it actually meant able, which I found that really touching, actually, that the community had sort of decided that it meant something else because she was so good. But then they all sort of turned against her at the end anyway at the marketplace, didn't they? So it just shows how fickle people are anyway.
And they had, I like that at the end too, where they kind of like, you know, after the minister dies or has his heart attack or whatever on like the public whatever platform or whatever in the middle of the market, they were like the stockades, I guess. Like they when she comes back to the village and she just like wears it like when she doesn't have to anymore, like later on.
Oh yeah.
At like the very end, and he kind of describes it as she weakens the power that this letter has by doing it voluntarily when she didn't have to, by like, and making the symbol mean less or be more positive than it was. Yeah. Changing the meaning of this symbol through this kind of act of courage. You could even say it's very Christian, maybe, like very, very embrace your sins.
Yeah, exactly. By embracing it, I feel like she embraces the sins so much that it makes her really seem very virtuous throughout. Whereas the minister, for your listeners who haven't read the Scarlet Letter, basically the guy at the beginning, her husband, he's like a deformed guy who I think he's like a bit of a hunchback or something. He's got like a deformed one shoulder higher than the other type of thing. He's like this older guy that she married in England, and she thought he got lost at sea. And then he turns up after he was captured by the Indians, and he sees her in the public square on the platform. But he doesn't associate himself with her because he doesn't want to like bring himself down, which is very like scheming and manipulative, I guess. But then basically he makes it his mission, doesn't he, to bring down the minister because the minister's hiding this lie that he had this tryst with Hester Prynne and that Pearl's actually his child. And this minister is like loved by all because he's such a virtuous, pious disciple of God or whatever.
And I hadn't considered that
pussy.
either.
He's just a total pussy. He's just lying to everyone, and they think that this like tremor in his voice and like his feeble way of being, they think it's because he's like so in service of God, and he's so like giving himself to God, but really it's just because he's done all of this and he feels guilty about it.
I didn't think about that either. The fact that her husband, or what's his name, Chillingworth, or whatever.
Oh yeah, but it's so funny as well. Though. Like, he never says what his original name was. Say his original name was just something normal, and say it was just like John Smith, and then he gets this place and he's like, I know, I'll call myself Roger Chillingworth. Like, it's like such a weird and stupid name because he's made up the name, and it sounds like so made up.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely.
And he pretends to be a doctor just because he's been doing some like peyote or whatever with the Indians. He's been to like a couple of like peyote ceremonies, and he's decided that he's a fucking doctor now, even though he's not got a diploma. And the colony just take him in as such. He's like, hello, I'm Roger Chillingworth. I'm a doctor.
Yeah, and I didn't even think of, when you bringing all that up, like how cowardly Chillingworth was in that scene where I didn't
both
even
of them,
register
him
with
and
me.
the minister, yeah.
Whereas like he was, and then not just the cowardly, they were both cowardly for years after, like.
I feel like with Roger Chillingworth, rather than it being cowardliness, I feel like it's more Machiavellian self-interest, where he realised that if he was associated with Hester when he got there, then his life wouldn't go the way he wanted it to go, but he could manipulate the situation and he could bring the minister down and control him, all while gaining position for himself, whereas the minister does feel like pure cowardice and sort of vanity as well.
Yeah, and I was thinking along the lines of the ending for Chillingworth and stuff, where everything falls apart and all his plan for vengeance, leaves him ruined. And it's maybe that gets back to the morality tale thing, where it's maybe even the Christian allegory, where it's like, if you're going to harbor this vengeful feeling for years, for this unforgivingness for years, it will eventually shrivel you up, like kind of like as he shrivels away at the end, and like a fucking
because all he cared about was his revenge, and after the minister died, he had no will to live anymore because he was just living solely for revenge.
Right, and they took it away from him. Yeah, like they took it away by confessing. Another very Christian allegorical kind of, like life lesson, morality lesson in that, right? Like, the truth shall set you free, right?
Yeah. It's very interesting that Roger Chillingworth, such a stupid name, that he left all of his like property and money to Pearl. That was surprising.
The bastard child, yeah.
Yeah, and then she was like the richest heiress in America, which wouldn't have been difficult because there was only a couple of like little colonies and not that many sort of European people over there anyway. So I guess it wasn't that big a deal overall. But she suddenly owned property in England and in America because of Roger Chillingworth, the daddy who did not step up, the stepdad who didn't step up. Oh no, wait. Oh no, because it's not the stepdad who didn't step up. He was just the ex-husband of her mum, I suppose. Yeah.
And there is, I did want to mention this one little thing because I just thought of Twitter immediately, and this is my Twitter brain, but it is remarkable that persons who speculate the most boldly often conform with the most perfect quietude to the external regulations of society. The thought suffices them, without investing itself in the flesh and blood of action. So it seemed to be with Hester. And this kind of like, I just immediately went to Twitter where kind of they speculate the most boldly, often conform with the most perfect quietude to the external regulations of society.
Yeah.
just the thought suffices. Like,
Yeah.
no the actual action, just the thought is enough to
Totally.
make them feel like they're not conforming while they are.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I thought that too. Not specifically
Yeah.
about Twitter, but just the way things are
It's
generally.
just my mind being obsessed with it. Like, I just own it too much, you know? Like, yeah.
But yeah, it is actually it is kind of feminist, but it does, now I'm thinking about it, because Roger Chillingworth is like in a very unfavorable light. The minister really is. Like, these characters have not very many redeeming qualities as far as I'm concerned. But then Hester does, and Pearl does too. There's like hope for them. Um, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And it comes after they tell the truth. Like, and Pearl's constantly harping on that too. You know, like Pearl is harping on her mother to be like, "Mother, what do you know? This man, don't talk to that man. He's not being honest. He's leading you on. He's
Yeah.
like, yeah." But I did want to get to that point where we learn about the truth, like what actually happens, where like the pastor and his parishioner in chapter 17, where we learn that it was Dimesdale that had the kid with Hester and then was a coward and let her be punished for years, almost a decade, with a child and not doing anything for it. And
Yeah.
but yeah. Okay, this little scene. Hester Pryne looked into his face but hesitated to speak. Yet, uttering his long-restrained emotions so vehemently as he did, his words here offered her the very point of circumstances in which to interpose what she came to say. She conquered her fears and spoke. "Such a friend as thou hast even now wished for," said she, "with whom to weep over thy sin. Thou hast in me the partner of it." Again she hesitated, but brought out the words with an effort. "Thou hast long had such an enemy, and dwellest with him under the same roof." And this is basically the little segment where we learn that actually it was Dimesdale that had the affair with Hester, and that Chillingworth is her late ex-husband. Who was living
Yeah.
with the minister at the time and, like, I guess slowly poisoning him or something.
Yeah,
or,
because like basically what had happened earlier is the minister had been unwell. I guess looking back, it was because he did this crime of like sleeping with Hester and creating this child, and keeping it secret, and it was making him ill. And then Roger Chillingworth arrives, and then he says to Hester in like a quiet moment when he goes to her into her prison as like she's having like a mental breakdown or something. I think that's, wait, when is that? Is that the night? I think that's the
it's
night.
in the forest. Yeah.
I think when, do you know when she's been stood on the platform for 3 hours or however long she's got to do it for? That night she gets taken back in the prison, doesn't she? And then
Right.
she's having a mental breakdown and going totally crazy. And then Roger Chillingworth is brought in as her doctor, to calm her down. And then he basically says to her, "Oh, I always get my man. I'm gonna like find out who the guy is that did that, that you had this affair with." And then somehow he ends up moving in with the minister to take care of him. So he must have had some suspicions at that point, mustn't he, that it was the minister for some reason. And he moves in with him, and they're sort of like friends. And Roger Chillingworth is doing his alchemy stuff, and the minister is doing his clerical. I don't know. He's doing all of his like priestly readings, and then they're sort of friends. And then basically over time, Roger Chillingworth is trying to find out, like, for sure that he's the guy. And when the minister falls asleep one day, Roger Chillingworth opens his vestments or whatever, and he sees the Scarlet Letter underneath. And then basically this Forestian is Hester, like, revealing this to him, isn't she? She's revealing to the minister that his friend who's been living with all this time is actually his enemy. And this really made
Right.
me think of, like, the minister was, like, so dramatic in this bit. It's like, basically, he's living in a shared house, and he's found out that his roommate's a total dick. And then instead of just, like, moving out or, like, changing his life, he really dramatically is like, "I guess maybe I should run away to another place, or maybe I should die right here." And it's like, get a grip, man. All you got to do is, like, move out. Just move out. You don't need to die.
Yeah. Well, it gets to that kind of the guilt, right? Like that kind of guilt as a motivation in this kind of a way that where I mean, there are, I guess guilt is a motivation in a lot of ways, and it is kind of, it is selfish in a lot of ways too, where I guess eventually Dimesdale does it for Hester, but for those 7 years leading up to when he actually confesses in the town, the marketplace in front of everybody in the village, they're like, he's doing it to help her, but also for his own like selfish reasons, like it's almost like to absolve yourself of guilt for knowingly doing wrong, at least not if it's accidental or whatever, but like for knowingly doing wrong, there's like a selfishness that taints the redemption, maybe, or
of the minister, you mean, at the end?
And
like you just feel like when she had to bear all of this for like 7 years after getting the Scarlet Letter, and she just did that all very like in a dignified, quiet way. And then with the minister, when he decided to reveal all at the end, he like drags her and the kid like down with him, and like just doesn't give a shit. He's like, he does his, what's it called, like his election speech or something. His like big thing that's like some big deal to him, which is they were going to run away together, but he decides to like, he has to do his like stupid election speech or whatever it is first. And then after he's done that and he's like won over all the hearts and minds of all the people, he decides to like just totally fuck everything up by just revealing that he, he goes and he finally stands by Hester and the kid, but he doesn't give her any choice in it. It's like, no offense, but this is like a really male way to behave. Of like, like women will like think things out for ages and how they're going to affect everybody involved, and they'll talk something through with a guy like to make sure it's all okay. He just like bumbles out and he's like, and he just like drags everyone down with him to the ground, drags the tablecloth, and like all of the wine spills up. Do you know like that type of thing? He just completely doesn't give a shit at all and just like does it because he feels like it.
And it puts her in danger the way he does it. Like it puts her and the child, Pearl, in danger for him to do that.
And then he just dies. Selfish.
Right.
That he just he's just like, all right, see ya, and then he just dies. Fuck. But yeah, he just totally doesn't think about it. He only thinks about how it affects himself. And then as he's dying, he even sort of tells her, I think he says something like she wants reassurance that they'll be together in the next life, and that all of this meant something, like this revelation meant something for their little family. And he just is like, what is it? I can't remember what he says. It's just something like, I don't think God would want that, or just something along the lines of he just rejects her even on his deathbed.
And I like that you did bring up like the kind of masculine versus feminine, because it's talked about in this novel, and it's talked about in the sexist way because this is from 1850, listeners, but it is important. And I think even contemporary wise in the kind of current society, there's a tendency to pretend that there isn't a line between the masculine and feminine, because there's a lot of overlap, but then there's also a lot of just red lines that just like you said, very masculine way to do this cowardly and then to make the woman suffer and the child suffer.
Or not even the cowardliness, just the sort of like unthinkingness of just being like, oh, I guess I'll just do this, and then doing it, and then she has to bear the consequences of it, kind of thing.
And he's scot-free because he's fucking dead. Like, no consequences for him. But I think that does matter, and I think it matters in this novel, particularly in terms of like the motherhood angle, and the kind of like the connection that the mother has to the child that the father can never really have. In terms of, just like carrying the child to birth and then caring for it and raising it and all of that. Like there's just something in it that men can never be a part of. And I don't mean that in like a, men shouldn't care about it. I mean it in like a, it's just a thing that's part of life where we have like, women have this bond with the offspring that, men, fathers also do, but not, it's just a different bond, like it's a different, and the kind of motherhood really
I feel like at the bit where, when he's done his speech and then he goes and stands next to them in the crowd and then holds the kid's hand and stuff, I feel like it seems like he's doing the right thing and he's doing like the bold thing for them, but then you realize in the end that it was just for his own like vanity and because he wanted to reveal it, and it kind of wasn't for the reasons that it seemed, of like standing by them as a little family. But I don't know what it was about the writing that made that clear, but something did make that clear. I guess it's because he showed that he didn't think he would be with them in the afterlife, I suppose.
Yeah, and maybe it's Pearl that shows it, that where Hester is more relieved than the Pearl is when they first concoct that plan of leaving on the ship, in 4 days' time, when they have their little kind of meet up in the forest, and it's revealed to us as readers that it was Dimesdale the whole time, and he's been a coward and made Hester suffer, and just you see Pearl's reluctance is maybe what shows us that his suddenly confessing and coming to terms with his quote unquote sins, right? Like his kind of adultery that he committed and then let Hester suffer for. She's not buying it, whereas Hester's like, oh, he's going to love us very much. He's going to, he's going to take care of us like a father should, blah, blah, blah. And then and then Pearl is like, is he going to hold our hand in the marketplace? Like, and she's like, not today, child. And then Pearl's like, well, then he's not, then he's not.
And then even when he does, it's like not really true. I don't know why he does that. He could just have not.
Yeah.
Maybe he's gonna die anyway, isn't he? Or maybe he died or maybe he died because he's so vain and he couldn't stand that everybody knew that he was there. But I love how this is what I mean. I feel like Nathaniel Hawthorne is actually was a feminist, weirdly, or something, because he not obviously by the modern day version of what that is, but he was definitely on Hester's side. And the way that he, even after the minister behaved in this way, after his death, people would speculate, instead of whatever she did, they would just jump to the worst conclusion. But with the minister, they were speculating that maybe he just went to stand near the sinful mother and child, to stand by them in his last hour, and as if he just did this good deed and all of this stuff. And they still wanted to see a really saintly side of him, even after it had been revealed. Obviously, the truth had been revealed.
Yeah, I think that's 100%. 100%. That's. Oh yeah, the feminist angle, and of course this book has been written about endlessly in terms of feminist angles and different ways you can interpret it and project onto it if you wanted. But it's it definitely, and I think a lot of writers at that time, right now, they get a lot of shit for not being feminist enough. But if you go back and you look at the context, in 1850, this was just the beginning of that first kind of suffrage movement, at least in the U.S. These were just slavery was still legal here at the time, in the United States. It was just women were second-class citizens, in the U.S. at the it's just. And then for him to be able to see the sympathetic side of that, where to kind of show the suffering of it and why it's bad, it's not given enough credit for being. I mean, it is, given credit for that, but it is it is very much a feminist text written by a man in 1850. It's not what you would think, but. I
want to know more about Nathaniel. I didn't really get a chance up to now, but I want to know more about him, because I did relate to the introduction bit when he's talking about the custom house, and he's talking about how he only had to go there for 4 hours a day or whatever it was, but it was he just didn't seem to be able to do any writing outside of his working hours. And I was kind of annoyed at him for that and jealous. I was like, bloody hell, try working 8 or 9 hours a day in an environment you don't want to work in, and see if you'd be able to write outside of that. But yeah, he was saying that, and that was really relatable, how he was talking about he'd go home and in the moonlight, which is supposed to be an inspiring time when everything takes a new shade, that's the perfect writing time. He still just couldn't come up with any inspiration. Right. I found that bit interesting in the introduction. I do want to know more about him. I know nothing about him, really.
And his most famous books are this one, and then the House of the Seven Gables is the other, and that's another kind of New England kind of story.
Have you read that one?
I read it a long time ago in college when I was forced to, so I was half-assing it, and I don't feel comfortable being saying that I know all about it. No, but I have read it, been forced to read it when I was getting my bachelor's. And I mean, it's good. I mean, I should read it again now that I'm older and more educated on it. Yeah, because it's classic one, but it's also kind of similar in terms of just the legends that sprung up through, like you said, we talked a little bit at the beginning where you said, yeah, the kind of witch trial legends that sprung up throughout Europe and all over the UK, and then were kind of, exported to the new colonies in the Americas as all the European nations were coming over and putting in colonies all over. There's the legends that develop around that, like the black man in the woods, right? We didn't even touch on that.
Yeah.
Like the man that takes your name in his book in blood, and then you're cursed, and that's what Mistress Hibbins or whatever the governor's sister was alleged to have done, and she's a witch.
And Mistress Hibbins, like when Hester and the child were leaving the governor's house, and Mistress Hibbins, whatever she's called, like shouted out the window to Hester, like, do you want to come with me to the forest to see the black man and we'll have some fun or whatever? And then Hester's like, I can't, I've got to take the kid home. And then they're like, even then, like the governors had just been talking about taking the child off of her because, she's not a fit mother or whatever, or they could put her somewhere better. But then that was illustrating how the child saves her soul in many situations, because she could have gone off with this, like, Mrs. Hibbins if she had been alone. And that just reminded me of, like, any time you'd be invited to, like, a rave or a horrible party by, like, a sinister, like, character like that, and, like, offering you drugs or whatever. I don't know, that's what that Mrs. Hibbins reminded me of.
Oh, yes.
Just, like, a sinister, like, MDMA, like, dealer in Glastonbury.
I was gonna say that's very female. I was not usually invited to parties by men and offered drugs, but I imagine most women were. No,
but I mean, like, just by, like, not by men, but like, sometimes by men, but just like the mischievous things you can get up to when you're younger, or like going on nights out, or people tempting you into doing things. It felt like that's what that whole thing was. Like the Mrs. Hibbins thing was trying to get Hester to go and do something like that. But because she had a kid, she couldn't, and she had to just go home instead.
And it maybe, like her purity makes her immune, like in those types of... Hester's such a good person and is trying to do the right thing in almost every circumstance that it prevents her from making mistakes like that.
But then it's also, like, who would really want to go to the woods with that, like, weird old woman who's, like, an absolute freak? Like who would even want that? What
good could happen at that?
Like, what's even tempting in that, really?
Yeah, like, you're like, oh, yeah, come to the woods with me, yeah. As if that, it always ends well.
As if it's, like, really enticing.
Yeah. I will say, like, as a kid, I mean, maybe it's different now, but like the woods was like freedom. Like when I remember growing up, like when you would go to the woods behind the court or something, like it was freedom. Like no adults, no supervision. You could jump out of the tree and nobody was yelling. Like you could.
Is that because are you from somewhere that like looks like this type of place?
Yes, I'm from Baltimore, and it's honestly. The weather's not as cold and rainy as like UK, but like the actual like climate is very similar. And I guess if you kind of look at the globe, like it's kind of on this, like at least the Massachusetts area is very much like the England weather with the snow and stuff that you get, and the cold that happens and stuff. But yeah, I was from an area that looked exactly like this. Pretty much the entire kind of Northeast, basically where I'm from, like Maryland, Virginia area, about halfway on the American East Coast. And then all the way up towards Maine, like the top towards Canada is basically like the same kind of landscape. So yeah,
this
very
is like
wooded.
Relatable scenery.
Yeah, very wooded. And
how come you live in Vegas?
Oh, we came here because my wife's career. If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com/heavyboard.
And I learned from Sex and the City because Mr. Big moved to what, Napa Valley or something? Is that in California?
Right.
That's like a wine thing as well, isn't it?
Oh yeah. Are you a big Sex and the City fan?
Yes, but Sex and the City is obviously the downfall of millennial women at the same time. But I'm like, I watched it all like from a scandalous age, from like 11 years old, basically.
When that box set came out, that big pink DVD box set. Yes.
Yeah. And like I've been watching it since then, and then basically I'm now rewatching it a lot of the time with a man who is being very judgmental and critical and like of like their behaviors, and like as I'm watching it, like his sort of like super ego of like thought is coming into it, and then I'm like, actually, yeah, it's terrible because I'm starting to agree over time that Carrie is like a self-involved dick, and like, and Samantha is just a gay man, and like they're all like ran through whores, but like I'm definitely watching it in like a much different way because I'm watching it with a man.
My
but
favorite was Charlotte.
That's what you get for making a man watch it with you.
My favorite was always Charlotte. Yeah.
Oh yeah, that's always a male favorite, obviously, because she's like the hottest and purest one.
Well, yeah, and she was like the least, like messy, I guess maybe, but
But she's pretty messy though. She just like hides it by like acting as if she's like holier than thou kind of thing.
Yeah, I've
So
actually.
have you watched it all as well then?
Yeah, I've seen all of them up through the second movie, but I haven't watched any of the new series.
Because you're a wife guy, that's why you want to watch it.
Yeah, it was, well, my wife's never seen it, but when I was, it's a long story, but when that box set came out, and I don't know, I'm a millennial, you're a millennial, right? Like you're I'm 34, and when that box set came out, I was like, 12, 13, 14 or something.
Yeah.
And I had a girlfriend at the time who was very into it, same age, like 12, 13, 14, and she's like, we watch it. So whenever we spent like months, when we would hang out or go over each other's places in that kind of high school dating way, we would put it on. I watched the entire series, and I was relatively into it. There are certain storylines I think that are better than others, but I've never been one to shy away from anything. Like I'm always, somebody's like, I'll sit through it. Like, sure, is it any good? Like, is it any good? Like, that's really all I care about.
I feel like I feel like all boyfriends secretly watched it at that time and didn't say, and no one would admit it. But then on Twitter, I'm learning that like many men have seen it, but like in real life, men pretend that they haven't seen it.
I can't stand liars I mean, everybody, a bunch of people lie online, but yeah, I can't stand it. There's a bunch of stuff that people say about. I mean, the discourse between the sexes is always a fucking eye roll or headache, usually when you're doing it through Twitter, but it is like, yeah, I mean, I saw the fucking movies in theaters. Like, I saw at least the first two, which were not very good, I would say, but,
I love them.
You like the first, both of them?
Which one was the one where they go to like Saudi Arabia or something?
The second
Is that
one,
the second one?
Yeah.
And then one of them, like Carrie gets left at the altar by Big. Is that the first one?
Yeah, with the bird in her hair.
I don't think I've seen the third one either. Then, or maybe I can't remember if I have or not.
Well, it was delayed so long, and I think because the woman Kim Cattrall like didn't want to do it, she was like done with playing Samantha, and she's still basically done with it. Like she didn't come back for the reboot and all that. Like she's like, nah, I'll just take my money
she's
and
coming
run.
back. She is coming back to the reboot though, because I've been watching the reboot. It's terrifying. They've all got the most horrible plastic surgery. Everyone except Samantha looks like Charlotte looks like a Halloween lantern. She looks absolutely horrible.
Yeah. And then I liked I liked the kind of, it's soap opera-y, and it's definitely for women, like in terms of like, but always the best scenes in that show were them sitting at lunch or whatever around a table and just kind of gossiping, right? Like those are always my favorite. I guess maybe it's just the writer in me or something, but like when they're all kind of gossiping around, and I think that's just the dialogue, how hip it was, how quick, how kind of sexy it was, especially for the time, like where you had, I don't want to say they were talking like men about it, but it was like just,
But they kind of were. That's what they were making a point of doing that, weren't they?
Right, yeah. And like you said, like kind of the behavior too, right? Like Samantha's behavior, more of like kind of a gay man than like a straight woman that was in her 40s, with like, like
40s/50s.
yeah.
You said she's in her 40s, but yeah.
I did want to ask you this, and we talked about it a little bit with kind of the Christian allegory and all that. Like, how does faith play into this? And I know there's like the obvious religion angles we can go down, but I think it's broader than that too, in terms of like faith and just belief, right? Like who's lying, who isn't, why do you believe that they are, you know, like who do you trust, this kind of faith in that way. You have a broader idea of faith, but then also the kind of religious faith. But yeah, I don't know, what are your thoughts? How would you say faith is used or played out into this story?
Yeah, like I feel like Hester has like ultimate faith in herself, even if she is really like depressed and unhappy. She like seems to really have faith in her ability to like care for her child. And I feel like all the others are just completely faithless, really. I feel like it's like the minister hasn't really got any faith at all, and Roger Chillingworth is just like all he cares about is revenge. It was very it has been interesting for me to like think about this aspect because I've just started a job as a research assistant for someone who's writing a book about, you know, like the whole Vatican II thing,
Oh, yes.
like the Vatican II, like sedevacantism thing. So I'm sort of getting to know all of that, and it's given me a reason to research like Christianity and Catholicism and just get to know more about like religion and, you know, Protestantism. So having that backdrop, which I've very, very recently only just started researching now, and then to read this, I'm like, oh, so this is directly coming from that sort of Protestantism, like that new
Right.
form of the religion that's coming out, and this is the results of it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
That's very interesting. And you're you said you just started doing some research for Vatican II and all that with the,
Yeah, so like I know a writer who is writing a book on that, and I'm helping them do research, like because they can't possibly, there's just so much research that they can't do it all
right.
themselves, and like I'm just interested in doing that. So yeah, I'm very lucky that I've got the chance to do that, but I can't wait to just read all of this type of stuff because I'm not that well informed on like the history of Christianity and the kind of I'm only learning little bits about it, but I'm really loving it already. And this book, yeah, like I don't know, what do you think about like the faith of people? Because it's strange how much faith doesn't really seem to take a part in it, apart from when it comes to Hester. I feel like she's the only one who really is faithful.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's for me, the reason I asked that question, I was just thinking about it, reading it. I was like, oh, this would be fun to talk about with Melly. It's like, it is. The reason I posed it as a broader than just religion side of it is because I think there's a couple of different things at work here, and I think that's intentional by Hawthorne. You know, like he wants to show, you know, I mean, you know, you go to mass, like the mystery of faith, right? Like the kind of, there are moments where you take that leap and you just believe for that. He wants to talk about the religious side, but then I think there's believing in the goodness of people, which is tied up in
Yeah.
the religious aspect, but can also be separated in some way and be broader in terms of themes. But yeah, I think it is. And I've been more fascinated by this recently. And I do know probably, I mean, I don't know, I'm not a fucking expert or anything, but I know a lot about the history of Christianity and the Vatican II. I have boomer parents, so that they were alive when
Right.
Vatican II was happening, and they were raised
Yeah.
Catholic and all that in a very Catholic city in America here. And it just, so there is, but yeah, I think that the faith is meant to show us, you know, strength and solace in terms of your faith or belief in religion, and then also kind of used as a crutch too. Like if like somebody like Dimesdale who was using the faith as a shield for himself to kind of protect himself
Yeah.
because he didn't have enough faith. I would say.
Yeah, it's like that thing of like sometimes an innocent little child who knows nothing about the world, supposedly like Pearl, can have more faith than someone who literally does it as a job, like Dinsdale, whatever he's called, who it's his entire purpose in life, but he just hasn't even got any. Like it's
Right.
like many such cases of people in those situations.
Yeah.
They're
Yeah.
actually the worst people to be doing it in the first place.
Yeah, because there's, and I think people do confuse this, particularly in the fucking, you know, online discourse and all that, where they do confuse that there is the faith in terms of just believing the religion, and then there's the kind of faith that's used as a proxy to maybe in this novel where they're using the authority of the faith to punish Hester, or using the authority of the faith to treat her as a pariah, or like, you know,
Yeah.
excommunicate her from it is It goes both ways. Like it basically, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like it does go both ways, where you get a deep meaning out of it when you personally believe, but then also you can be weaponize the faith in certain ways. And I mean, we throughout history, this is all you're studying the history of Christianity. There's been a lot of that, but it's yeah, I mean, I was just always curious, how it works. And then just like the idea of trust too. Like I was, I said I was raised Catholic, all the way up through, confirmation and all that, went to Catholic schools. And, I was when I first, stopped believing, I would, I was very angry. Like I was very like unforgiving, very like, like I was betrayed in some way or lied to. And then, but as I got older and I, still very many friends that are in the church and things like that. And I started to realize that, it's not about that so much as the faith. Like I'm much more fascinated by faith than I am by, adhering to a set of rules or something like that.
By the actual religious aspect.
Right. Yeah. And the kind of what that gives you and how people use it and yeah, so I'm much not as staunch as I used to be.
So you sort of like did believe, did you?
Oh yeah.
Because you did believe, and then you went through, then you sort of didn't anymore, and then that caused you some kind of pain. Is that what happened?
Yeah. When I was like 17, 18, getting into that mind space, going to college, and then I did get very into what they call the new atheists, right? Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris and Chris Hitchens and things like that. I was very into that as a kid, young man. And even them, I think they are even overzealous about it, calling it dangerous and using historical justifications for it and things where I think that was an exaggeration, but when I was young and I kind of first discovered that it was, I mean, I honestly, I don't know if I could explain, how that happened or how I came to stop. I think a lot of people do it just because, or stop with the faith that they were raised in just because they're lazy or they just don't want to deal with it. Like they kind of want to stop going.
It's just, it's like interesting for me to ask you as being, because my dad was Catholic, but I didn't really get brought up in that type of. I didn't get brought up as a Catholic because I was living with my mum who wasn't a Catholic. So I didn't go to Catholic school or anything. I didn't have anything beyond being baptised. So aside from really just sort of like going to church with my dad's side of the family in Scotland, like occasionally, or going to the Church of England, which is different, and aside from just sort of saying my prayers like vaguely to God and like vaguely believing in it, I didn't have as strong a thing as you, like, being completely within the church and just like fully believing in it. So I feel like actually I didn't ever go through that phase of like losing it and becoming atheist because I never had it that strongly in the first place, but I feel like I found it more strongly as an adult maybe. So I'm always interested when people go through it that way around, where when you're a kid you really, really believe in God and the church and then you reject it, because I wonder what that would feel like, because I've never actually, can't really imagine that.
Yeah,
to like sort of lose it.
To attempt to describe it, I mean, it wasn't like a huge like life-shattering moment. I was too young for it to maybe be that to me.
Right.
I was just kind of, I'm 17. I like punk rock. Like whatever. You're
more just like rejecting the restrictions of the church.
Exactly.
Kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think there's something in America where people, it's like a boomer reflex, because maybe it's because of Vatican II. So it comes in here where like the boomers that were raised in the Catholic part of the countries because America, I mean, it's just like all the other, I guess there are actually huge regional divides in terms of the religion and stuff. And when you get further south, Catholic stops being, and it starts being more Protestant or Baptist or evangelical. And, I never really had that kind of, oh my God, existential, because I was just too young. I was too stupid to have that. Like I was losing something.
Right. Rather than you sort of deeply believing in actual God from your own perspective, it's more just like that guidance of your parents towards believing in the things you're told at church, which is a different thing, isn't it? That just feels more like being propagandized to, kind of.
And I think our one of our mutuals, Jack TPN, shout out.
Yeah,
He talks about this, where he talks, movie like Spielberg or something. These directors, these boomer directors, that they were rebelling against the Catholic Church because it was a huge part of American life when they grew up. It was less so when I grew up. 30, 40 years after the boomer generation was coming up. So it was like a theme in a lot of boomer directors and movies throughout the 60s and 70s and stuff. And in that case, maybe it was a rebellion against more oppressive forces. But, when I was growing up, it was post-Vatican II. It was like 50 years post-Vatican II. It was kind of the reformations had started to happen.
So your mum, because like my dad died earlier this year, and I'm kind of really gutted. Yeah, and like I'm really gutted that I didn't get a chance to talk to him about the Vatican II thing, because he was alive when all this happened. Because I've only just sort of become aware of Vatican II over the last, like, I don't know, 2 years, but it wasn't prominent in my mind when he was still alive to like ask him, because I hadn't started doing this research thing yet. So like, was you aware of, was your parents, like, was you aware of this, like, for your parents since you've been growing up then?
Yes.
Did they mention this?
They would talk about it all the time.
They cared about it. What did they think about it?
I would say my mother, they were kids when it happened, but just talking to them as adults, when I knew that, my parents, they're in their 70s now. They're retired and approaching that age.
Yeah.
And it's I would say my mother was always more religious than my father. Was kind of a man of science. He was a doctor, and kind of. He wasn't like a staunch. He never would say that he was an atheist to me growing up or anything like that. But he would very much, thought it was important to take us to like the events. So we would go to mass. Sunday school. I went to Catholic schools growing up, and all that. But but they would always talk about it because they were involved. Growing up in Baltimore, like what you did when you grew up as a boomer, you were an altar server. You volunteered in the church. You had to attend the mass every Sunday and stuff. And they would always talk about how whenever we'd complain or something about mass being long as kids or whatever, they'd be like, "You got no idea." Like the pre-Vatican II mass was like 4 hours.
Does your mum like the Novus Ordo? Like, does she like the new mass of it being in English and the way that it is more sort of participatory? What was her view? Was it better? Did she feel more positive about the modernization or the way it was before?
I think she was. I never really asked. If I had to guess, I would say she probably didn't mind it because she was a girl when it happened, and. Probably just liked that, the mass wasn't 3 hours anymore, and that it wasn't in Latin, and that you could actually touch the body of Christ and things, and all that. Maybe, but my grandmother. Speaking of Irish Catholics, my grandmother, she very much loved it, and I'd gone to a few Latin masses in my youth because for Easter and things like that, in the holidays in the church, because my grandmother was very much a part of it. And there's a bunch of cathedrals in kind of downtown Baltimore, like very old, very Catholic churches that are quite beautiful, gorgeous, old cathedrals. And we would go to, they still do occasionally like the kind of old school Latin mass.
It's really difficult to find Latin mass over here. It's really difficult.
I mean, it's difficult here too. They're not very prevalent, but if you have those big old churches, sometimes they do it around the holidays. They'll do like one or two like Latin masses around Easter or Christmas and stuff. But I don't know. I mean, I know there's like a whole thing online right now.
Pope Francis has like put a stop to. There used to be more Latin masses, and now it's incredibly hard to find them because Pope Francis has taken them away further than before.
Right.
Benedict reinstated them, so there were Latin masses, but I think they're few and far between now. Because one of my mutuals was trying to find a Latin mass for me because he's a bit trad and he wants me to go to one, but then he couldn't find one in the whole county. So,
yeah. I guess I'm not as familiar with that, but I do I follow Red Scare and all that, so I do see Dash always going off about it, but I don't keep up with the
talking about Vatican II,
I haven't kept up with the kind of the Tradcath wars online and what they're fighting over, but
I'm only being aware of it because it's now my actual job to be aware of it.
Right.
So as of 2 days ago. So
Yeah. I am fascinated by it, though. I am very fascinated. And I think, like I said, more so from, I'm very interested in the faith angle of it, you know, and the idea of belief. And I don't know, and how everybody all over the world can have these different beliefs, and that helps them. Like, it literally not just provides order and morals, but like spiritual fortitude or like strength, you know, like having a faith in something. You know, I guess maybe I'm like the new atheists, I would say, were maybe too dismissive of that benefit when they would criticize all these religions and things when that was hot, you know, when I was a kid and stuff, and they were coming up.
Yeah.
The spiritual
yeah, because I feel a little bit like with the atheist thing. It's kind of like, so if you're an atheist, the best that's going to happen is you just believe in like this bleak end and like there being nothing after it. Whereas if you believe in God, then at worst you'll be seen as a fool who only gets to live in, like, you know, you only get the atheist thing anyway. But at best you can maybe go to heaven, and that actually it benefits you to have faith anyway. So it's kind of seems to me to just be like the sensible option to be faithful, because just in case you're right, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Because it doesn't really serve you to be nihilistic about things, and you may as well just believe in like the nice fairy tale. I don't know, as an adult I've just came more to the conclusion that like that's just they you know, it's reported, even like scientists have reported a lot about how physiologically it's better for you to believe in God or to have faith in something spiritual, and then who cares whether it's true or not?
Right.
You just may as well go for it. And then the more you believe like that, then it just like spirals and spirals in a good way, to the
Right.
point where then it really helps you in your life. So that's just the only way in which I've turned to it, because it just seems like the most sensible way to do it, rather than to be nihilistic. I definitely went through
Right.
like a massive nihilistic phase for ages, though, like a very atheist nihilistic phase for
Very
like,
millennial. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, it is, isn't it,
Yeah,
really?
yeah.
Yeah.
We, as much as we try to deny it, I think there are a few things that are very unique to our generation. And even, you know, like you said, you know, you grew up in fucking England, like thousands of miles from where I grew up, but it was still these kind of generational things. Whereas, like, yeah, the new atheist movement was hot. The technology change. I mean, it just all of these things that, you know, the
Liberal
movies.
feminism.
Yeah, yeah.
Sex and the City did my
Sex
generation of
and the
women
City,
so
yeah.
dirty. Sex and the City did us so dirty.
Yeah.
I love it, but it really, really did.
What do you mean?
Like, it's just like watching it again is like watching going back to the scene of the crime. It's kind of like it was just like the pinnacle of liberal feminism, of just telling you that like you can just like you can sleep with different guys, and you don't need to I don't know, you don't need to make relationships like the most important thing. Your career is more important, whatever. And also that if one boyfriend goes, there'll be another after, you know, there'll be
Right.
another one coming along soon. And it's all this sexual experimentation. It's just something that's very particular to millennials, because the generation before wasn't like that. And then obviously Zoomers are sort of not like that either. They're like way more trad. They've
Right.
gone in way more the other direction, haven't they?
And I think, you know, people talk about this all the time online, but I think most people are correct when they say there is a yearning for meaning. And I think you see Zoomers, particularly, a lot of them are so desperate for it. Like they don't even know what to do. Like they don't even know what direction to
Yeah.
head. And they're, you know, if it just whatever comes across the timeline is whatever, oh, well, you know, like run with that one or something. And they haven't even really thought about it. Yeah.
But they seem more like naturally religious than us, because yeah, we were brought up like, you know, as soon as we came to sort of sentience, everything was very atheist and
Yeah.
capitalist, and then for me like feminist. But whereas these guys seem a lot more like naturally religious, or like prone to believe in some of these traditional things. I don't know, maybe the Zoomers will be okay. Maybe they'll be more okay than we will.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I wonder about that too. How much is always exaggerated when we're, you know, talking about online, you know, discourse and stuff. It's there. How much is overblown? How much is, you know, people are making a huge deal out of something that, you know, maybe is always the case and it kind of goes away, you know, like naturally, or we freak out over the slightest little variance for days. You know, when you log in, you're just like, oh God, I'm rolling my eyes. Yeah, like,
I don't like
Jesus.
how sad the young people are though, because when I was their age, I was having like so much fun and like I wasn't on the internet and I wasn't overthinking things and I was just out with my friends and
Right.
having adventures. Like do you ever feel like that where like you feel sad at like how much they're over analyzing things and like the gender wars between them and like some of them they'll be like a good looking 20-something-year-old boy or girl and they've never had a girlfriend or boyfriend. They've never like had that. That's crazy.
It's,
That's unbelievable to me. It's like insane.
I, when I went to grad school, it was, you know, I was 26 when I started grad school, and it was so eye-opening to me when I met these younger people. Some of them weren't even younger. Some of them were my age. I met 3 adult virgins in
Really?
when I was in grad school. And I was 26. Like, that's a lot, right? Like, that's 3 out of like
Yeah.
12 people like in the program or whatever. And some of them were my age, some of them were younger, but I was like 26. I knew nobody in my personal life who was an adult virgin. Like, I thought that was like, that was just the Steve Carell comedy. You know, that was the
Yeah.
the only time I thought it was a joke. But apparently, and then I'm seeing that happen more and more. And whenever I, you know, it comes across my timeline, any of the dating discourse and stuff, I am just like, oh my God, like you all are not going to make it. Like, I mean, it's terrible for everybody, but I mean, I see the men side of it more, and I'm always just like, you poor boys. Like, I was like,
Yeah.
you need an adult man, and like maybe it'll have to be me or somebody where you just like, no. Don't do that. Get a haircut.
Yeah.
Stop wearing that. Like, stop.
It's crazy. It's
Talk
crazy.
to
And, like,
her. Yeah.
this is why they're all so like Puritan as well, because I had
Yeah.
this like body count tweet that had something ridiculous like 500,000 like interactions or something, and everyone going crazy at me. Like it was insane. But I guess a lot of those were just like teenagers pretending to be adults and just, you know, like they've just got all these views that stem from their own isolation
Right.
and lack of interaction with the opposite sex. Because whatever it was that I said something really like nuanced and normal and like not a big deal
Right.
at all. If I would have said that same thing like 10 years ago, nobody would have batted an eyelid. It was just something that was like, if women don't get like at least some degree of experience going into a relationship, then it's going to come out in other ways, or like, you
Right.
know, they might not be as good at being like a wife or a mother if they haven't had like some form of, you know, experiences leading up to that. And then everyone went absolutely crazy.
Dude, the body count discourse. I mean, that trends what every couple weeks, like online. There's like a new
Yeah.
fucking round of body count discourse. It's so insane, especially from the male angle when you see these guys that are like, oh, 6, 7, 8. I'm like, dude, like, you think that's a lot? Like, you think 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 is a
know.
lot? Like, Jesus Christ, like get
Like,
the fuck.
where were you in the 2000s?
Like, Jesus
Seriously.
Christ, dude. Like, you have, like, you're not in trip. Like, it's just, wow. Like, yeah,
And there's these polls that are like, how many people have you slept with? None, 1, or more than 5.
Right.
And the other button, see results. And it's like, if you've slept with more than 5 people, then you're a demon who will never be redeemed. But yeah, like, I've never had as many people come at me as that tweet. It was completely mental. Have you ever had that? Have you ever done that on Twitter where like you say something like that you don't, well, to be fair, I knew this would be a big deal, but like I was just in like a shitposting
Right.
type of mood. But like, have you ever had that where you do something and then you get like a lot of people coming at you in like a really nasty way?
Yes. Yes, I've been on the bottom of a pile in the Twitter before. Yeah, it's a rite of passage if you're going to put yourself on Twitter, I feel like. But it is. If you're hearing this, it's because you are listening to the free public feed of Heavy Board. To get complete, uncensored, uninterrupted, full access to this podcast, become a subscriber at patreon.com/heavyboard. That's right, Heavy Board is made possible by subscribers like you. For less than 1 cup of coffee per month, you will receive private access to uncensored, full-length episodes, Jerk Shop, heavy bonus content, subscribers-only AMA episodes, bonus extended interviews, and more. Come join the conversation today at patreon.com patreon.com/heavyboard. Yes, mostly never for anything that big, because it mostly in the literary world it's happened to me with like people just putting out like ridiculous things. And I mean, it wasn't even like I was putting my foot, same thing with, it wasn't like you were putting your foot in your mouth or anything. It was when you're saying something crazy. Like I was just, saying something that was relatively
something like
normal.
normal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just, funny or whatever, or dismissive in the kind of snarky internet way. And then, yeah, you just start getting dogpiled, like kind of, it starts getting into the wrong feeds, and it gets,
I felt like Hester Pryne on the platform being called a hoe by 500,000 people.
There was an editor one time from not a major magazine, but one of the bigger magazines in the literary world, and I was standing up for somebody who was getting dogpiled for bullshit reasons, and of course I remember she tweeted out that, oh, go ahead and block Andrew Wittstadt, go ahead and block him because he's a Nazi or whatever it is, fucking
really
incredible.
So that's worse when it's like in the
yeah.
But when I feel like that feels more personal if it's in like the literary, it's in an area where you're working in, or like you're trying to gain some success. That feels more hurtful and like personal than just some like groiper anons on Twitter.
For sure. And it was in defense of somebody that they were trying to blackball. Like, it was me trying to be like, hold up, don't blackball people for right. Yeah. That was basically my side of it. And then they were like coming after me because I stood up for the person that was getting blackballed, and it didn't turn out well. But yeah, I know it. Yeah. Definitely been on the bottom of it. Not the body count stuff though. I imagine that gets, especially for women, like the DMs, and I can't imagine. Like, yeah.
Oh, no one can DM me unless I follow them back anyway.
Oh, okay.
That was fine.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. That's what you have to do. I mean.
But yeah, so you had it where they came after you for trying to you were trying to stand up for someone, and then they tried to turn it and say that you were like one of the bad people.
Yeah. I always thought it's always an exaggeration. I always say like what defines our time right now is like absolute hysteria, and people always want to say the hysteria is on both sides, because there's some truth to that, because you can find articles where people that aren't on the left are being hysterical about whatever things, you can find whatever you're looking for, especially in the internet age.
Yeah.
But then I'm just like, dude, it's so disproportionate. Like people are being so hysterical from the left side of things. Like it's so hysterical. Like it's just not even close to equivalent in proportion. Like I don't know what anybody's talking about. You guys are being hysterical about everything.
Well, being hysterical is like being part of being a leftist, I guess. It's like part of the DNA of being one.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking of leftism, it was funny, it was funny, and it's small, this little thing. It's about when they're about to do the up on the blockade or whatever in the marketplace, and what's his face, Dimesdale's about to do his thing, or he's giving his speech, but there was this little thing, page 221 in mine, where he says, the picture of human life in the marketplace, though its general tint was the sad gray, brown, or black of the English emigrants, was yet enlivened by some diversity of hue. A party of Indians in their savage finery of curiously embroidered deerskin robes, like this kind of like DEI in the time of Puritan New England. This enlivened by some diversity of hue is how it's described.
Oh yeah,
because the Indians came.
I did really love all of the talk of. I did love I wanted to know more about the Indian tribes with the Puritan settlers. I wish that did you say does his other book talk about that?
Like the Puritans?
Like the Indians with the Puritans. Did you say that? Is his other book like that, or did I remember that wrong?
It was not this book specifically, but other books from a little earlier than this, where I went through a couple years ago. I read all of James Fenimore Cooper's kind of Leatherstocking tales, which are very big in America here. It's like the classic kind of, basically the first couple westerns that were done about the expansions west in the U.S. and
will you send me some links to that or something? I'd like to read that.
Yeah, what's the most famous Last of the Mohicans is the most famous book in that series, but that actually, people give him a lot of shit now because, of course, looking back with rose-colored glasses, we can pretend that this, James Fenimore Cooper was an awful racist, which, sure, he was probably racist, but it's just, when you read those books, everybody talks about how awful they are, but when you actually read them, like this guy cared a lot. He cared a lot about the natives. He cared a lot about the tribes and the different societies within the tribes. And he really tried. I think when you read it, you can tell that he respected and cared and wanted to show like the reality of it in a lot of ways.
Yeah. And he was it's not his fault that he was the one in a position to do that.
Right, exactly. He was, and that was what, like the 1820s and stuff, where he started putting out those books. And that was like, pretty much he invented the kind of mythology of the American West, where the kind of cowboys and Indians and the kind of, mining booms and all that, and the settlers heading out on like the Oregon Trail, all like the kind of big historical moments, but just the way he does it with all the different tribes, because the tribes are at each other's throats. Then they have the English settlers, and then not just at that time, it was beyond English. It was German, Italian, everybody coming over from Europe to seek a little bit of quote unquote freedom or peace or flee persecution. And it was just the way he handled it just opened my eyes to a lot of how much trade was happening, how much peaceful living side by side, even though there were a lot of wars. There, most of the time it was peaceful, even though, the history of it, of the colonists pushing the Native Americans off their land, blah, blah, blah. But it was like, there was more respect than we tend to gloss over that. Exactly. There was more like,
of course, because to write a book about this stuff, you do have to care about the subject, and if you care and respect about your subject, you can tell when you're reading it. But yeah, when they were describing in this book, when they described in the Scarlet Letter the old world, which they come from, they described it as the old world. I was like, no, don't leave me there in the old world.
Right.
Because I've got so used to like being in New England in the book that I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I've been left here in the old world. I'm back here in the ancient place that's been forgotten.
Yeah, it's funny that they still use that as a signifier in certain things, right? So really, they only use New World and Old World, right? At least in my knowledge of it. They use that to differentiate wine varietals. So is it Old World or New World? And also tobacco varietals and like cigars.
Oh my God, I didn't know about this. Yeah. Do they really?
Yeah, that's like the only circumstance where they still say Old World and New World, meaning, Old World is Europe and Asia and all the continent over there. And the New World is basically the Americas, South and North America. Yeah.
That's so cool.
But it's weird because, it gets a little, people sometimes get bristle when they hear those categories, but it is kind of like, that's how people thought about it. Whereas like this was the world.
It's romantic.
And then they found this lush landscape in the middle of the fucking
I only
water.
Bristle and as well, I only don't like it because I'm stuck in the old one. But I do think it is a good way to describe things though, definitely. Yeah. Maybe we should bring it back.
Well, like I said, it's still used when you're talking about tobacco or wine or probably even
whiskey.
Maybe I should
change my podcast name to The Old World. Reports from the old world.
The old world. Where did you get the now then from, actually?
It's just because it's a northern phrase. It just means like okay then, or like let's go or something.
Okay, yeah.
But Jimmy Savile also used to say it, so many people have taken the piss out of me saying that it's his catchphrase. But to that I say, don't be racist towards regional dialects, because that's just the thing that people say all over the north. It's not just him. So yes. I can't believe I said that because I was trying to erase it from the lore of my podcast, but there I am bringing it back.
It had made me think of when I first was heard the name of it. I was like, did you ever see that movie Now and Then from like the 90s?
No.
I guess it's American. Where like I had an older sister, so I saw like all like those movies that would come out. That were meant for like teen girls, but I was like 8 or 9 or whatever, watching them with my sister and stuff. So like Now and Then was a big one when that came out. It always makes
what
me
was
think
it
of
like? It's
about
like
this
group.
Film? Yeah, it's about this group of friends that are like girls, teenage girls, preteen girls, and kind of a 1950s suburb America that have this kind of bond between them, and then they keep flashing back and forward between them being like 40-year-old adults, women getting together again. And where they are, and like the things they went through together that led them to this very kind of heartfelt, touching movie. I haven't seen it in a long time, so I don't know how much it holds up. But I always liked it because I thought one of the girls was smoking. I forget her name, but I was like 9, 10 or whatever, and she was like 13 or whatever, like in the movie, like So I wouldn't think
it. Oh, I've never heard of it.
Yeah. Sorry if I send you on a wild goose chase for like a mediocre movie, but yeah, absolutely. My last question here for the Bookwise is, what did you think of the ending?
So yeah, so they both get put. So yeah, Hester's come back to the town, hasn't she? And she lives out the rest of her days. And then she gets put in a grave that's actually beside the minister in the graveyard, I guess. But there's a little bit of space in between, isn't there? So I don't know. So they're not putting them in there together, but they're acknowledging that there was like a real relationship. And then let me see. Then it said, I'm just going to read it.
Yeah, please.
So said Hester Prynne, and glanced her sad eyes downward at the Scarlet Letter, and after many, many years a new grave was delved, near an old and sunken one, in that burial ground, beside which King's Chapel has since been built. It was near that old and sunken grave, yet with a space in between, as if the dust of the two sleepers had no right to mingle. Yet one tombstone served for both. All around there were monuments carved with armorial bearings, and on this simple slab of slate, as a curious investigator may still discern and perplex himself with the purport, there appeared the semblance of an engraved escutcheon. It bore a device, a herald's wording of which might serve for a motto and brief description of our now concluded legend. So sombre is it, and relieved only by one ever-glowing point of light, gloomier than the shadow, and then this is what it says on the gravestone. On a field sable, the letter A, Giles. So I had to look up what that means. So the actual tombstone means like in a field of black, the letter A is like burning bright red. That's what I've taken that to mean.
Right.
Do you think like that's what I can gather it means? Like, what did you think? Did you look that up, or did you instinctively know what that meant?
I didn't look it up, and I didn't instinctively know it either. I just kind of keep going. But yeah, I would say the ending to me, I would say almost biblical. Like, and I think he was aspiring to that type of on your deathbed, relaying the truth, kind of.
Yeah, and it's very mixed, isn't it? Because on the one hand, they haven't acknowledged that they're in there together. They haven't even give them individual tombstones, and the tombstones are talking about the letter A. But because they are still near each other, so their relationship has been acknowledged, and the letter A kind of ended up becoming quite a positive thing for Hester in some ways. It's not necessarily bad, is it? It's kind of like mixed.
Right. Yeah.
It's like it's somewhat positive.
Yeah, and I think that's purposeful too. And I guess just how epic, especially like him dying as he has this moment of total clarity at the end, and then Hester coming in there and being buried next to him eventually. Yeah, it just had a grand sense. I guess that's why I kept trying to say biblical, is because it was like a grand sense of not necessarily closure, but there's some ambiguity to how it ends up too, right? It worked out, but then there's also the scar of it still,
Yeah.
the scar.
Oh my God, do you know which bit I loved? I loved the bit where, do you know where he opens his top just before he dies, and he shows like the Scarlet Letter. I love how in the conclusion it talks about no one really knows what it was that they saw. Some people say there was nothing there. Some people say that he had a letter A sewn into his skin. Other people said that it just grew out of his skin from his like anguish. And I really loved that. And I love the idea of just like the brutality of opening your shirt and there's a sort of letter A like stitched into your skin in like a really gross, graphic type of way. I think that's my favorite imagery in the whole book.
And the legend, right? The story is one thing, and then the legends around it are give even more meaning to the people living in that village, the kind of legends around the forest with it's added to that same legend of like what they would say in the novel is like the black man and his book out there in the woods.
Yeah.
It's like another added thing to the lore of this specific area and this specific village and all the people have, you take your own conclusions, and there's like the people that are more practical about it, and there's the people that embellish it, the people that say, oh, how did he get that letter on his chest? Did he brand it into himself? Did he sew it into his skin? Did he, was that his quiet penance that he was giving himself?
I did love the suspense of that as well, because the whole way through the book, whenever he's like anxious or something goes wrong, or he's upset, he grasps his chest like he's gonna have a heart attack. And it did have me wondering the whole way through. I was like, okay, so if he's just got a fabric letter, how is it staying under his top? And how did he get the fabric letter? How did the governor and the other people not know that he's got the fabric letter already? Like, I was wondering, like, the whole way through about that. Was you?
Yeah. And there was, like... Yeah, I guess it's supposed to show us that he knew the whole time. And I mean, like, I guess it's supposed to show us his guilt in some way that he was carrying.
Oh, yeah, because it's like saying that even if you're not, like, he's not wearing it outwardly as like a fabric symbol, but it's growing out of his skin into this thing that's much, much worse and more painful, and like a physical ailment that's killing him. Like,
the truth shall set you free. You are a prisoner of your own mind if you're not being truthful and honest. If you're not, or like you're a prisoner of your own body if you're not being true and honest, or if you're hiding guilt, or if you're hiding something, or even, especially in this situation so extreme, blaming somebody else who's more vulnerable than you, more likely to be killed because of it, even, like, it just... Yeah, like the ultimate sin where you're sacrificing somebody who's weaker than you to pay for your, indiscretions and guilt and betrayal. Like, betrayal in this novel, like, huge theme.
I know. And
not just betrayal on the individual level, like human interaction. I think betrayal of faith too, right? Like the minister kind of betrays his position and faith in that, because of cowardice, or because of, it's been written about endlessly, listeners. Like, there's just, there's so many angles. If you literally just Google the Scarlet Letter, like, critical essays or whatever, you're going to get millions of hits on every angle you could imagine. But yeah, the themes.
I love the bit where he goes on his little rampage as well, when he almost says something rude to some old lady, and then he wants to like swear with the sailor, and then some like hot young virgin maidens who really admire him come over, and then he like gets all horny, but like doesn't do anything. He doesn't like. He suddenly realizes he can use his power to manipulate them, and he doesn't, and he comes out of it unscathed. That did bring me quite a lot of glee. Actually, I found that quite fun. That he was like thinking all these thoughts, but like not doing anything about it. I was wondering what he was going to do.
Yeah, and I think I'm thinking about this now when you bring it up, the unseen aspect of it. So he had his revelation unseen in the town. It was in the forest with Hester, by themselves. Even the Pearl wasn't even with him. She was off playing. And then he gets back into the town, and he's like stumped. Like, he like can't even process like the kind of, like, the fear still gripping him, and then also like his usual habits are not, like, just are not acting the same way he's expecting them to, where he can't even think of any verses to quote to this woman that wants him to quote a verse as the minister, and his mind goes blank. He's like, it's like a weird combination of joy and maybe aloofness and kind of, but also that guilt still hanging in the back of him, because he's like, oh, we could walk out of the woods right now, holding each other's hands, but we're gonna wait 4 days, and I'm gonna give this speech, and then he's like paying for his not accepting the consequences of his actions, and responsibility, maybe even, like.
And I didn't see any of it coming still. Like, I didn't see any of the twists and turns. I thought that I didn't think that he was going to be the problem. I thought it was just going to be the other guy.
Oh yeah. And I mean, it's I guess my concluding thoughts when I got to the end of this novel was just, man, like, I see why this has stood the test of time, at this point, almost 200 years, that it's because it is so rich with these contradictions, with these struggles of faith, with these struggles of purity, with these struggles of even just like being a good person. I think we tend to get overzealous with that too. Like, everybody has flaws, of course, and we're not always a good person 100% of the time. But there is like a natural, like I always say this, like I have a hard time, like lying is very hard for me, like it's very, maybe it's just my Catholic upbringing or something, like the
Yeah.
guilt, but I
Yeah,
just,
yeah, same.
it eats
Yeah.
me alive. Like if
No,
I'm
same.
knowingly lying to somebody, even if it's just something like a surprise party or whatever, like
Yeah, I know.
it's just very
Because then
hard
you've
for
also
me.
got to keep up with the things that you said,
Yeah.
which is, yeah,
Yeah, and it's so much work to lie. Like it's so much
I
effort
know.
to keep up a lot. Like it's just I guess my instinct is to reject it. Where yeah, there is a value that we place on honesty, and I don't know. It is interesting. I give my students this essay every semester when we're talking about definition, and basically like the essay I give them to I assign them to be like, you have to pick a term and define it, and that can be a fun essay if you do it a certain way. It can be a pain in the ass if it's not
Oh,
clicking
who
with
do
you,
you
but
teach? Like, what age are these people?
I'm an adjunct at a community college, so I mostly teach 101, English 101 in college,
Wow, that's
the
cool.
community college here. And but I give them this essay, and it's called "The Insufficiency of Honesty," and it talks about how honesty is held up as a virtue, but the guy's arguing that you know, honesty without integrity. So when people are just like, well, I'm just being honest, you're saying something rude, right? Or you're saying
Yeah,
something
yeah,
mean, and you're just
yeah.
being honest. They said they use that as an excuse to be like, oh, well, I'm being honest, so it's okay because that's an ultimate virtue, where he says it's more than that. Like you have to have integrity with that, because honesty
So
without
true.
integrity is just, selfish almost. Like
Yeah, exactly.
like the preacher or the minister in the Scarlet Letter,
Yeah,
right? Like
exactly. Yeah, that's
he's
perfect.
and he gives a bunch of examples in the essay, and it usually gets the 18-year-olds. I mean, it's community college, so there's always wide range, but it's mostly like 18, 19-year-olds.
Yeah,
But they usually get stirred up by some of the kind of moral dilemmas he presents in the essay as arguments. A lot of them about infidelity and things like that,
yeah.
and the scenarios, and confessing on your deathbed is one of the examples he uses in that essay, where you
Right.
confess. The example he uses in the essay is infidelity between a married couple, where the husband is dying, the wife is obviously not, and she's at his deathbed in the hospital, wherever it is, and he's feeling immensely guilty because he had an affair 35 years ago or whatever, and she never found out about it. He got away with it, I guess you could say, but he's feeling terrible guilt, and he's dying, so he relieves himself by confessing it to his wife on his deathbed, right? And the
Yeah.
guy examines it from the angle like, is that honesty with integrity, right? Because one, he's dying, so he's not going to have to face the consequences of his
Yeah,
honesty,
and then she's got to
and then
deal with knowing
you're
that
right.
that whole thing was a lie.
The rest
Yeah,
of her life is now being burdened with
yeah.
him relieving himself from his lie, like
Right.
his
Yeah.
inner guilt. So there's like a selfish way to relieve yourself of the guilt, and it is kind of an
Totally.
interesting way to turn that on its head, like
Mm.
even besides the immorality
And
of the
also, if you
act or whatever.
confess that
But
to someone as you die, and like if you confess to that, if you confess to that as part of your marriage, you could talk it through over like weeks or months or whatever it
right,
took to like feel better about it. But you don't get that opportunity if someone dies straight after they've said it.
yeah, and the fact that why are you doing it? Are you doing it because you feel guilty, or are you doing it to absolve yourself when you have no consequences? The stakes are gone at this point, and all you're
Yeah.
doing is leaving your spouse with this burden of knowing that it was a lie, that you were lied to for
God,
30
yeah.
years, like, and the devastation,
Messed up.
yeah. So you're like putting it on somebody else, and I think maybe that's what's being shown with like Hester never remarrying, Hester just coming back voluntarily wearing, like the Scarlet Letter, and the yeah, I mean, it's an
Yeah.
interesting way to think about that with integrity, and everybody gets obsessed with intention. Oh, I didn't mean it that way. I didn't mean it that way. And it's like, yeah, we know, but it's like, you know, are you doing that with integrity? Are you doing that with, honesty in this regard? Like, or are you just trying to, shit post and be an asshole or contrarian or whatever it
Yeah.
is? Like, are you coming from a place of integrity and honesty that are intertwined, or are you doing it for selfish reasons? Whereas a lot of people online, I feel like, do it for selfish reasons. Even the confession stuff, right?
Totally, yeah, because it's like it's like acceptable within our culture. One of the most refreshing things about reading this book is obviously I'm not saying that the Puritan mindset is good because clearly that's got its own problems, but I just mean there's something really refreshing to us about reading something where like having virtue is like an important thing. Like at this time being virtuous and good is more important than like showing off or like having stuff or having
Right.
status. And like I really love that, and let me know if there's any other similar books to this or even older ones that are of that vibe, because it kind of, this is like corny to say, but it kind of does make me want to be a good person, like reading this.
Yes.
Like it actually, so I guess it is a fable, and I guess it does work even if it wasn't meant to be, because it definitely has the impact of making me think that like it's just because in our modern day-to-day lives, unless you've got a family that instill this in you, just from what we see as like atomized individuals in this culture, there's nothing that ever says that having virtue and being good is important. It's just
Right.
never a thing, is it? All the
Did
other things are seen as much more important, like having money or
right.
being young or like being good looking or
Right.
like being exciting or interesting as a person.
Quirky. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Did you ever watch Friday Night Lights? It might be very American because it's about like, American football, but
No, I've never heard of it.
it was like a CW like show. So it's a little corny, a little kind of soap opera cheesy, but I watched it for the first time on Netflix. I think over the pandemic I was putting it on with my wife. And I've always heard things about it, and the book was pretty big and the movie was pretty big, but they made a series about it. And I literally like every time I watched it, like I was like in tears by like the end of every time I was like, because it's mostly about this guy who's like a high school football coach in kind of a small town in Texas, which if you know anything about American Texas, it's football is a big deal in Texas,
Right.
especially like, so if they're playing like so even a small town high school football team, like if you drive through parts of Texas in America here, like you'll just drive through a small town and their high school football stadium will be like a 25,000 seat like professional looking stadium
Wow.
with next to like this town that's dying. It's kind of like, yeah, it just shows where their priorities are. But like, so it's a big deal, but it's basically about a guy who's this football coach, and he keeps getting put in situations where he has to do the right thing, sometimes at great cost to himself and reputation. And it's just like, that was something that's like a relic that like eked out like in like the early 2010s, like I think it started like
Yeah.
2006 or something and ran to like 2011 or whatever,
That's
but
so true, because even in like Dawson's Creek
right.
or
Yeah.
like
Another one.
there's like certain programs of that era where like that really, yeah, goodness like kind of matters, and then it drifts off into like in like for example in the world of Sex and the City,
Yeah.
it's not about being good, it's all about doing what you want. It's all about like the self as being the most important thing and doing what you want and not letting anyone get in the way of your individuality. But like before that, yeah, goodness seemed to matter
And the one
before that
episode
period of
that
time.
stands out to me is this guy, the coach, one of the assistant coaches gets accused publicly of being a racist, right? And everybody's leaning on the coach to fire the assistant coach because it's in the press and it's a big deal and it's causing all these issues. And he was, the board is leaning on the coach, the principal, everybody at the school is leaning on him to fucking fire the assistant coach. But he keeps saying, and, he's put a lot of pressure on it. He's just like, I know this man and I know he's not, and I don't care what anybody else says. And then at the end of the episode, you find out he's struggling. They make you think he's going to fire him just because there's so much pressure on him to do it, even though he doesn't want to. And then at the end of the episode, he comes out to do the press conference and just, stands up for himself, his coach, his players, and says, no, like, I'm not doing it. And I'm just like, whenever I watch that, or so, like, I always feel that feeling come through me where I'm like, yes, this guy is standing up for what he knows is right at great personal cost. And
Yeah,
it just kind of like brings me this overwhelming sense of like, oh my God, like this is what it is to be a good person. Like
yeah.
to
Like this still matters.
and
It
when it's
matters more than
tested,
ever
yeah.
because people think it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and it's tested. So it's easy to be a good person when you're never tested on it, right? Like,
Of
and it's
course,
easy to
yeah.
follow the doctrines of a religion, whatever your faith is, to when nobody's testing you, when it isn't hard, like when it
And,
isn't,
or when
yeah,
no one cares what you're doing. Like if you're a
right.
person of power, it's much more difficult because you have a lot more temptations. If you're somebody who's right up there, like the people who we judge for like being bad in whatever ways, like it must be so much harder in that situation to choose the right path.
And just like there were like, part of that show, I guess I hate to keep bringing it up. I know you haven't seen it, but it's like, it's the part of it is he's molding young men too, because he's a high school American football coach. And he is like, and I guess maybe it's because I went to an all boys, private school, Catholic school, and it's there is something about having that adult man in the room that is holding you accountable for no, that's not what you do. Like that you're not a good person doing that. And I remember I had this football coach, and this is before I went to the school, but he was still a coach there, and he was a very beloved teacher. Shout out to Augie Maselli. I know most people listening to this don't know who he is. He was a fantastic man, and he's long gone now, but he was a fantastic teacher, taught at my high school for like 50 years and coached football and all that. And he was very old school, so when we were in school and stuff, if you were mouthing off to him, he'd grab your tie and like yank you to his face. And he was an old man doing this, like in his 70s. But he always told this story in the 80s when he was the head football coach for a while, and they won a bunch of championships. And he said one year, every year we had what we called the Turkey Bowl on Thanksgiving, which is like our high school would play our rival high school in like a big game. And it was usually like a fun, and it's been going on for like 100 years, blah, blah. But like he said one year, he had like 5 star players that went to like a party the day before Thanksgiving, which is a big thing out here in America, the day before Thanksgiving, because everybody's off is like a party day, like the Wednesday before. And they got drunk and got caught, right? They got caught getting drunk underage, as teenagers do, right? And he said that he wouldn't let them play in the final game, which was a big game against the rival high school, And he said, he's all right, well, you guys can't play as your punishment. You're not playing in this big game that matters, and it might affect your scholarships going to college, blah, 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 all that.
Right. Yeah.
And then he said after he made that announcement to the team, he said probably 20 guys on the team came up to him in his office and was like, Coach, we're going to lose if you don't let them play. If you don't let them play, Coach, we're going to lose. And he said he looked at him and was just like, you really think they should play? You think we're going to lose if they don't play? And all the players were like, yes, Coach, we do. And he just said, okay, well, then you can sit out too. You don't have to play either. And he just like stood by that and just said, I'd rather lose with a bunch of guys that did the right thing than win with a bunch of guys that did knowingly the wrong thing,
Woo! Go Coach. That really seems like a sort of like morale to American film right there.
Right. And it is like, I get that kind of almost chills, like kind of when I even think about the story, because it was so moving to me, even as a kid, like a teenager at the time, when he's telling us this, like this guy who's been through some things, like he's, and it just, I talk about dating discourse. Yeah, I think a lot of young men need that. They need like an old football coach.
No, exactly. We all need an old football coach. I think we all do. Yeah. I was talking to Nina Power about that, about like the lack of having a father in society. But that's another topic altogether.
I know, and I've kept you so long. You were fantastic.
No, it's been great. I'm really glad to have talked about this book. I really love it, and I'm gonna, after this, when I go to bed, I'm probably gonna read the last. There's like a bit by D.H. Lawrence at the end of the book. Has yours got that on it?
No. But I like that. Yeah, that makes sense that the Penguin has that. Yeah, with an essay.
I'm gonna read it. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
Of course, please. I'm going to have you back because this was fantastic. Shout out to, or any final thoughts where we said everything?
No, I think we've said everything.
Yeah.
I've said everything, unless you have any final thoughts.
No. Sorry to keep you with all those stories of my fucking thing. Where can people find your stuff? Where can people find Now Then and your Twitter handle and all that? Drop your links and...
So my Twitter handle, what is it? I think it's Melly by C, and my podcast is on Patreon, just like patreon.com/Now Then. It's on Spotify, Apple. Yeah, that's it. So it's Now Then, like all together as one word.
Nice. Leave it a review, listeners. Go out there and listen to it. Leave it a review, subscribe, all that. Melly, this has been fantastic. Thank you. And this has been another episode of Heavy Board.
Heavy.
Bored.
Heavy.
I am heavy
Bored.
I may say that the male is entirely hostile. No!
Resources.
Life, friends, is boring. We must not say so.
shows such a lack of gratitude for life. Bored. I aspire to boredom, I should say.
Bored. Heavy.
I am heavy.
Bored.
Has you the night sweats and the day sweats, pal? Pal, I do.